The one she woke to find herself moving through darkness, cradled in a stranger's arms. The last thing Clara Whitfield remembered was collapsing beside her trunks at that godforsaken way station, alone and abandoned 5 miles from anywhere that mattered. Now rough wool pressed against her cheek, and the steady rhythm of horse hooves carried her toward an unknown fate. Philadelphia seemed a lifetime away. Her teaching certificate meant nothing if she didn't survive the night. But the man holding her, his silence felt like either salvation or doom. Welcome to a story of survival, second chances, and unexpected love on the 1875 Wyoming frontier. Stay until the end to see how one desperate night changes 2 lives forever, and comment below with your city so I can see how far this tale has traveled. The Wyoming sun had no mercy. Clara Whitfield learned this truth the hard way, sitting on a splintered bench outside what the locals generously called a way station, though it was little more than a leaning shack with a crooked sign that read Promise Creek, 5 miles. Her 2 leather trunks sat beside her like silent witnesses to her spectacular miscalculation. Inside those trunks were all her worldly possessions, 14 books, 3 teaching dresses her mother had sewn before the fever took her, a daguerreotype of her family, and a certificate from the Philadelphia Women's Normal School declaring her qualified to shape young minds. That certificate felt like a cruel joke now. "You should have kept your mouth shut, girl," she muttered to herself, watching a dust devil spin across the barren landscape. Should have smiled and nodded when that driver made his lewd suggestions. Should have pretended to be stupid and grateful. But Clara Whitfield had never been good at pretending. 20 hours earlier, she'd been full of righteous fire when she'd confronted Jack Denton, the stagecoach driver, after he'd put his hand on her knee for the 3rd time. She'd slapped him hard enough to leave a mark, called him a lecherous toad, and informed him that she'd be reporting his behavior to the territorial stage company. The other passengers, 2 miners and a salesman, had watched with wide eyes but said nothing. Denton had smiled with all his teeth. "Well now, Miss High and Mighty Schoolteacher, this is my coach, and I decide who rides and who walks, and you just earned yourself a nice long walk." He'd thrown her trunks off the coach right there at the way station, cracked his whip, and disappeared in a cloud of dust, taking the other passengers' sympathetic glances with him. That had been at noon. Now the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of blood orange and bruised purple, and Clara was beginning to understand the difference between courage and foolishness. The way station keeper, if one had ever existed, was long gone. The building was abandoned, its door hanging on one hinge, its windows empty of glass. She'd explored it briefly, hoping for shelter, but the interior was worse than the exterior. A dirt floor littered with broken bottles, a ceiling full of holes, and the distinct smell of something dead decomposing in the corner. Better to stay outside with her trunks, she'd decided. At least out here she could see trouble coming. The first coyote appeared just as the sun touched the horizon. Clara spotted its silhouette on a ridge about 200 yards away. It sat perfectly still, watching her with an interest that made her skin crawl. Within minutes, 2 more joined it, then 3 more. "Go away!" she called out, her voice sounding thin and ridiculous in the vast emptiness. "I'm not food. I'm a teacher from Philadelphia." The coyotes didn't seem impressed by her credentials. She looked down at her possessions, desperately inventorying anything that might help. Her reticule contained exactly 37 cents. All that remained of the $3 she'd started with. Her hairpins could maybe serve as weapons if she jabbed them at... No, that was absurd. She had a small sewing kit, a handkerchief her mother had embroidered, and a letter of introduction to the Promise Creek School Board that now seemed like it had been written for someone else's life. The temperature was dropping fast. Clara wrapped her shawl tighter and tried to remember everything she'd read about surviving on the frontier. The problem was she'd read mostly romantic novels where resourceful heroines were always rescued by handsome scouts or reformed outlaws. She'd devoured every adventure story she could find, James Fenimore Cooper, the dime novels her father had forbidden, even scientific journals about Western territories. But none of them had included practical advice like what to do when you're stranded at a defunct way station with no food, no water, and a pack of coyotes assembling for dinner. "Think, Clara," she whispered to herself. "You graduated top of your class. You read Latin. You can recite Wordsworth from memory. Surely you can outwit a few wild dogs." but the coyotes kept multiplying. 8 now. Maybe 9. It was getting hard to count in the fading light. She thought about her father back in Philadelphia, probably sitting in his study, surrounded by unpaid bills and empty whiskey bottles. He'd called her foolish when she'd announced her plan to teach out west, called it running away from her responsibilities. By responsibilities, he'd meant marrying Bernard Ashworth, the dry goods merchant who'd offered to settle the family debts in exchange for Clara's hand. Bernard's a good man, her father had slurred. 43 isn't too old. So what if he has 7 children? You like children. You want to teach them, don't you? This is the same thing, just permanent. Clara had looked at Bernard Ashworth's thin smile and calculating eyes and seen her future. A life of servitude masquerading as marriage, endless childbearing, and the slow death of every dream she'd ever harbored. The West had seemed like salvation, a place where a woman with education and determination could build something of her own. Some salvation, she said aloud, watching the coyotes creep closer. They were bolder now, emboldened by darkness and her obvious helplessness. She stood up, making herself as large as possible, and shouted at them. "Go on! Get out of here!" They paused but didn't retreat. Their eyes caught the last rays of sunlight and glowed like copper coins. Clara's heart was hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. She grabbed the largest piece of wood she could find, a broken slat from the way station fence, and brandished it like a club. It was ridiculous, and she knew it. If they rushed her all at once, she'd last maybe 30 seconds. The first stars were appearing overhead. The same stars, she thought distantly, that shone over Philadelphia. Her mother used to tell her that stars were the souls of good people, watching over the living. "Are you watching, Mama?" she whispered. "Because I could really use some help right now." The night swallowed the last of the twilight. The coyotes moved closer. Clara pressed her back against the way station wall, wood slat raised, ready to fight even though she knew it was futile. Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. If she was going to die out here, killed by wild animals or exposure, a footnote in territorial records, if that, she wouldn't die weeping. "Come on then," she shouted, her voice cracking but defiant. "I'm Clara Elizabeth Whitfield, and I'm not afraid of you." The lie tasted like ash, but she said it anyway. That's when exhaustion hit her like a physical blow. She'd been traveling for 8 days straight, trains, ferries, and stagecoaches, sleeping in fits and starts, living on bread and weak tea. The adrenaline that had kept her upright suddenly evaporated, and her legs simply gave out. She slid down the wall, landing hard beside her trunks. The coyotes crept even closer. She could see their individual faces now, their tongues lolling, their shoulders hunched forward. The alpha, the largest one, was maybe 50 feet away. Clara tightened her grip on the wood slat, but her arms felt like they were made of lead. Her vision swam. The stars overhead seemed to pulse and multiply. She thought she heard her mother's voice singing a lullaby from her childhood. "Sleep, my little one, sleep. The night is full of wonders. Sleep, my little one, sleep. Tomorrow holds no thunder." "Wrong about that, Mama," Clara mumbled. "Tomorrow holds nothing but thunder. Today, too. Thunder and coyotes and my own stupid pride." Her eyelids were so heavy. Just for a moment, she thought. Just close them for a moment. Count to 10. Then stand up and fight. She made it to 7 before sleep dragged her under. Clara would never know how long she slept. Later, she would try to piece together the timeline. Was it an hour? 2? Long enough for the night to deepen, for the temperature to plummet, for the coyotes to grow bold enough that one was sniffing her boot when the sound of wagon wheels cut through the darkness. She didn't hear them at first. Didn't hear the horse's steady hoofbeats or the creak of wood and leather. Didn't hear the low voice that said, "Whoa there, Goliath, easy now." What she heard, filtering through layers of exhausted sleep, was a gunshot. Her eyes flew open to chaos. A man silhouetted against the stars, a rifle in his hands, pointing at the sky. The coyotes scattering in all directions, yelping in surprise and fear. Her own scream, raw and terrified, cutting through the night. "Easy!" The man lowered the rifle immediately, hands up in a gesture of peace. "Easy now. I'm not here to hurt you." Clara's back was pressed against the way station wall, her makeshift club raised in trembling hands. Her heart felt like it might explode. "Stay back!" "I will. I am." His voice was deep, calm, the kind of voice you'd use with a spooked horse. "Just scared off those coyotes. They won't bother you now." Her eyes were adjusting to the darkness. She could see him better now, a tall man, broad-shouldered, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and a canvas duster. His face was shadowed, but his posture was non-threatening, almost gentle. Behind him stood a large draft horse hitched to a sturdy wagon. "Who are you?" Clara demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. "What do you want?" "Name's Elias Merrick. I'm heading into Promise Creek. My ranch is just beyond it. Saw you from the road." He gestured to her trunks, her disheveled appearance. "Looks like you've had a rough day." "I'm fine." The words came out automatically, absurdly. She was very obviously not fine. "The stagecoach will be back for me." Even in the darkness, she could sense his skepticism. "Miss, that way station's been abandoned for 2 years. No coach is coming back tonight. Maybe not tomorrow either, depending on who you angered." The truth of it hit her like cold water. She'd been telling herself that Denton would cool off, that he'd send someone back for her, but of course he wouldn't. Men like Jack Denton didn't forgive public humiliation. "I can't." She swallowed hard. "I can't pay you. I have 37 cents, that's all." "I'm not asking for money." Elias Merrick took a slow step forward, moving into a patch of moonlight. Clara caught a glimpse of a weathered face, strong features, eyes that looked tired but kind. "It's going to freeze tonight. Those coyotes will come back. You'll die out here if you stay." "I could die if I go with you." Clara's fingers tightened on her pathetic weapon. She'd read enough cautionary tales about young women who trusted the wrong men in remote places. He nodded slowly, as if he'd expected that response. "You could. That's true. I'm a stranger, and you've got no reason to trust me." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "My mother's name was Elizabeth. She came out here from Ohio in '58 with nothing but a carpet bag and a dream of teaching school. She died when I was 14, but she taught me that women who brave the frontier deserve respect, not harm." Something in his voice, the genuine grief when he mentioned his mother, made Clara's grip loosen slightly. "I have a sister in Promise Creek," he continued. "Rebecca Hale. She runs the general store with her husband. If you come with me, I'll take you straight to Mrs. Peterson's boarding house. She takes in school teachers, traveling nurses, respectable women. You'll have a room with a lock. You can ask anyone in town about me. If you don't like what you hear, you can move on tomorrow." Clara studied him, her educated mind trying to calculate odds and read character in insufficient light. He could be lying. He could be the worst kind of predator, using his mother's memory as bait. She could climb into that wagon and never be seen again. But the temperature was dropping by the minute. The coyotes were just beyond the reach of the firelight, waiting. And despite everything her rational mind was screaming, some deeper instinct was whispering that this man wasn't lying. "Mrs. Peterson's boarding house," she repeated. "You'll take me there directly?" "Straight there. You have my word." "Your word?" She almost laughed. "I don't know you, Mr. Merrick. Your word means nothing to me." "Then you'll have to decide if dying out here is better than taking a chance." His voice was matter-of-fact, not cruel. "I won't force you, but I won't leave you to freeze either. So I'll load your trunks, and you can decide whether to climb up or stay put." Without waiting for her response, he moved toward her luggage. Clara tensed, but he simply picked up the first trunk, heavy with books, like it weighed nothing, and carried it to the wagon. Then the second one. He arranged them carefully in the wagon bed, securing them with rope so they wouldn't shift. The whole time he kept his distance from her, kept his movements slow and predictable. It was, she realized, exactly how you'd behave around something wild and frightened. When he finished, he walked back to the front of the wagon and climbed onto the seat. He picked up the reins, then turned to look at her one last time. "There's a blanket in the back. It's cold but clean. If you change your mind, there's room." Then he clicked his tongue, and the big horse started moving. Clara watched the wagon begin to pull away, watched her trunks, her entire life, disappear into the darkness. In 30 seconds, she'd be alone again. In 30 seconds, she'd have chosen death by pride over the terrifying uncertainty of trust. "Wait!" The word burst out of her before conscious thought. "Wait, please!" The wagon stopped. Clara grabbed her reticule, abandoned the useless wood slat, and ran toward the wagon on legs that shook with relief and terror. Elias Merrick didn't move, didn't reach down to help her, just waited while she climbed awkwardly onto the wagon bed, nearly falling twice before she managed to settle among her trunks. "Smart choice," he said quietly, then clicked to the horse again. As the way station disappeared behind them, Clara pulled the promised blanket around her shoulders. It smelled like horse and hay and wood smoke, clean, honest smells. She was shaking, but not entirely from cold. She'd just put her life in the hands of a complete stranger. God help her, she'd just chosen to trust. The journey to Promise Creek took nearly an hour, though it felt like both an eternity and no time at all. Clara huddled in the wagon bed, surrounded by her trunks, watching the stars wheel overhead. Elias Merrick drove in silence, giving her space to breathe and think. The wagon rocked gently over the rutted road. The horse, Goliath he'd called it, plodded steadily onward, its massive hooves finding purchase even in darkness. Clara found herself studying the back of Elias's head, the set of his shoulders. He sat straight but not rigid, moving with the wagon's rhythm like he'd been born to it. "Mr. Merrick?" Her voice sounded strange after so much silence. "Ma'am? Why were you out here? At this hour?" "Been visiting a sick horse at the Anderson place. Their mare was colicky, touch and go for a while, but she pulled through." He glanced back briefly. "Was planning to camp on the trail, but something told me to push on home. Guess I know why now." "Divine intervention?" Clara heard the skepticism in her own voice. "Call it what you want. My mother would have said the same thing, that God puts people where they need to be." A pause. "Don't know if I believe that anymore, but I'm glad I listened to the feeling." They fell silent again. Clara wrestled with the urge to keep talking, to fill the darkness with words that might reveal more about this man's character. But she was so tired, and the wagon's rocking was oddly soothing, and the blanket was warmer than she'd expected. Her eyes drifted closed. When she jerked awake, heart pounding, disoriented, the wagon had stopped. They were on a slight rise, and spread below them was a collection of lights that could only be Promise Creek. It was smaller than she'd imagined, maybe 30 buildings clustered around what looked like a main street. But after the vast emptiness, it looked like civilization. "Almost there," Elias said. 10 more minutes." Clara sat up straighter, trying to smooth her hair and dress. She must look like something the cat dragged in, dusty, disheveled, with bits of hay in her hair from the wagon bed. Not exactly the impression she'd hoped to make on her first night in town. They descended the rise and entered Promise Creek proper. Even this late, Clara guessed it must be past 9 o'clock. There were signs of life. Light spilled from a saloon's windows, accompanied by the sound of a badly played piano. A few men stood outside what might have been a general store, smoking and talking. They watched the wagon pass with the frank curiosity of people who noticed everything in a small town. Elias guided the wagon down a side street, stopping in front of a 2-story building with a painted sign, "Mrs. Peterson's Respectable Lodging for Ladies." Every window on the first floor was lit, and Clara could see curtains, flower boxes, and a well-maintained porch, all signs of feminine habitation. "Here we are," Elias said, setting the brake. He climbed down, then finally, turned to help Clara out of the wagon bed. His hand was calloused and strong, his grip firm but careful. The moment Clara's feet touched solid ground, her legs nearly gave out. She'd been sitting so long, and fear and exhaustion had taken their toll. Elias caught her elbow, steadying her. "Easy. You've had a long day." "I'm fine," Clara said automatically, then reconsidered. "Actually, no, I'm not fine. I'm exhausted and terrified and confused, and I don't know if I should thank you or be angry that I needed rescuing." To her surprise, Elias smiled, a real smile that transformed his weathered face. "Be both. Most worthwhile things make us feel more than one way." Before Clara could respond, the boarding house door flew open and a plump woman in her 50s bustled out, lamp held high. "Elias Merrick, is that you? What on earth are you doing here at this hour?" "Evening, Mrs. Peterson. Brought you a new tenant," he gestured to Clara. Found her stranded at the old way station. She's the new school teacher." Mrs. Peterson's eyes went wide. She hurried down the porch steps, holding her lamp up to get a better look at Clara. What she saw must have satisfied her, because her expression shifted from suspicion to maternal concern in an instant. "The new school teacher? Oh, you poor dear, we've been expecting you for 3 days. The school board was starting to worry. Come in, come in. You look half frozen." She shot Elias an approving look. "You did right bringing her here, Elias. I'll take care of her now." Clara found herself being ushered toward the house, Mrs. Peterson's arm firmly around her shoulders, but she paused at the steps, turning back to where Elias was already unhitching his horse. "Mr. Merrick?" He looked up. "Thank you." The words felt inadequate for what he'd done, but they were all she had. "Truly, thank you." He nodded once, tipping his hat. "Welcome to Promise Creek, Miss Whitfield. I hope it treats you better than your journey did." Then he was leading his horse away, her trunk still in his wagon. Clara watched him disappear into the darkness, feeling suddenly bereft, which was absurd. She'd known the man for less than 2 hours, and most of that time she'd suspected him of being a potential murderer. "Don't you worry about your things," Mrs. Peterson said, correctly interpreting her concern. "Elias will bring them by first thing tomorrow. He's a good man, one of the best we have. Now come inside before you catch your death." The boarding house interior was everything the way station wasn't. Warm, clean, and welcoming. A fire crackled in the parlor. The walls were papered in cheerful yellow. The air smelled like bread and coffee and furniture polish. "I have 37 cents, Clara said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "That's all. But the school board promised me room and board as part of my contract, and I can work to pay for anything extra. I can cook or clean or—" "Hush now." Mrs. Peterson guided her to a chair near the fire. "The school board pays me directly for your room. You don't owe me a penny. Sit there while I heat some soup and water for a bath." Clara sank into the chair, and the moment she stopped moving, everything hit her at once. The fear, the exhaustion, the bizarre surreality of the past 12 hours. Her hands started shaking, then her whole body. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold it together, but a sob escaped anyway. "There now." Mrs. Peterson reappeared, pressing a cup of hot tea into Clara's hands. "You've had a terrible fright. Let it out, dear. These walls have seen plenty of tears. Most of them wash away by morning." So Clara cried. She cried for her mother, dead 3 years but still missed every day. She cried for her father's weakness and her own desperate flight. She cried for the girl who'd left Philadelphia full of hope and the woman who'd fallen asleep beside her luggage expecting to die. And then, finally, she cried from relief. She was alive. She was safe. Tomorrow she'd begin her new life as a teacher in Promise Creek. Tonight, she'd survived. Mrs. Peterson let her cry, occasionally patting her shoulder and refilling her tea. When the storm finally passed, Clara wiped her eyes and looked up at her hostess. "I'm sorry, that was unprofessional." "Nonsense, that was human." Mrs. Peterson settled into the opposite chair with her own cup of tea. "Now, tell me what happened. Start from the beginning, and don't leave anything out." So Clara did. She told her about Jack Denton's wandering hands, her foolish courage, being abandoned at the way station, the coyotes, the bone-deep terror, falling asleep expecting never to wake. And then Elias Merrick appearing like something out of a storybook, his quiet competence, his mother the teacher, his careful distance that had somehow convinced her to trust him. Mrs. Peterson listened without interrupting, her face grave. When Clara finished, she shook her head. "That Jack Denton is a piece of work. It's not the first time he's pulled something like this, though usually he just overcharges or takes a longer route. Abandoning a young woman alone." She pressed her lips together. "The Territorial Stage Company will hear about this, you mark my words." "Will they do anything?" "Probably not, but they'll know and word spreads. Sometimes that's enough." Mrs. Peterson stood. "Now, that water should be hot. Let's get you cleaned up and into bed. Everything else can wait for morning." The bath was the most wonderful thing Clara had experienced in weeks, Mrs. Peterson had set up the copper tub in a small room off the kitchen, filled with steaming water that smelled faintly of lavender. Clara scrubbed away days of travel grime, finger-combed the tangles from her hair, and emerged feeling almost human. Mrs. Peterson had laid out a clean nightgown. "Belonged to my daughter before she married. and led Clara upstairs to a small room at the end of the hall. It was simple but charming. A narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, a small desk under the window, a wardrobe, and a washstand. A lamp burned on the bedside table, and someone had placed a vase of dried wildflowers on the desk. "It's perfect," Clara whispered. "It's yours for as long as you need it." Mrs. Peterson pulled back the quilt, revealing crisp white sheets. "The school is a 10-minute walk down Main Street. I'll show you in the morning. Sleep as late as you like. The school board doesn't expect you to start until Monday, and today's only Thursday." Clara climbed into bed, and the moment her head touched the pillow, she felt herself beginning to drift. But a thought pulled her back. "Mrs. Peterson, you said Elias Merrick is a good man. How do you know?" The older woman smiled. "Because I've known him since he was a boy. Watched him grow up after his mother passed. Saw him care for his dying father, build a ranch from nothing, and never once complain about the hardness of it. He's helped half the families in Promise Creek at one time or another, mending fences, delivering foals, sitting up with sick children. He doesn't talk much, and he keeps to himself mostly, but when someone needs help, Elias shows up." "He saved my life," Clara said quietly. "He did, and he'll never mention it again. That's not his way. But you'll see him around town. He comes in for supplies every week or so." Mrs. Peterson moved toward the door, then paused. "Get some rest, Miss Whitfield. You're safe now. Whatever chased you out here, whatever you left behind, it can't touch you in Promise Creek unless you let it." Then she was gone, taking the lamp and leaving Clara in darkness broken only by moonlight through the window. Clara lay in that unfamiliar bed, listening to the sounds of a strange town settling into sleep. Somewhere a dog barked. Somewhere else, a baby cried briefly before being soothed. The saloon piano had finally stopped, leaving only the whisper of wind through the cottonwoods. She thought about Philadelphia, about the life she'd fled, about Bernard Ashworth's thin smile and her father's disappointed eyes, about her mother's grave in Laurel Hill Cemetery, the headstone reading Elizabeth Sarah Whitfield, beloved wife and mother. Then she thought about a man named Elias Merrick, who'd appeared out of nowhere with kind eyes and careful hands, who'd given her a choice when she had none, who'd delivered her safely to this place like she was something precious instead of something discarded. Tomorrow she'd begin teaching. Tomorrow she'd meet the children whose minds she'd been hired to shape. Tomorrow she'd start building whatever this new life was going to be. But tonight she was simply grateful to be alive. Clara closed her eyes and let sleep take her, dreamless and deep, the sleep of someone who'd walked through fire and somehow emerged unburned. Outside, the moon climbed higher, and Promise Creek slept. And 5 miles away, at a ranch built by a man's own hands, Elias Merrick unhitched his horse, fed him an extra measure of oats, and stood for a long time staring at the stars, thinking about a frightened young woman with fierce eyes who'd chosen trust when every instinct screamed for caution. "She's got courage," he said to Goliath, who nickered in agreement. "Real courage, the kind that matters." Then he too went inside to sleep, never imagining how thoroughly that chance encounter would change everything. Morning came too soon and not soon enough. Clara woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains and the sound of women's voices drifting up from below. For one disoriented moment, she thought she was still in Philadelphia, that everything, the journey west, the abandonment, Elias Merrick, had been some fever dream. Then she saw the dried wildflowers on the desk and remembered. She was in Promise Creek, Wyoming. She was alive. She was starting over. A soft knock at her door made her sit up. "Miss Whitfield, are you awake?" Mrs. Peterson's voice was gentle but cheerful. "I've got your trunks here, and breakfast is ready when you are." Clara scrambled out of bed, suddenly aware she was wearing a borrowed nightgown and her hair was a disaster. "Just a moment." She opened the door to find Mrs. Peterson standing with another woman, younger, perhaps 30, with warm brown eyes and a kind smile. Behind them, Elias Merrick was maneuvering the second trunk through the narrow hallway, his hat in his hand and his expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Merrick brought your things by, just like I promised," Mrs. Peterson said. "This is my daughter Sarah. She's going to help you get settled while I finish breakfast. And Elias, you'll stay and eat. I won't hear otherwise." "I don't want to impose, ma'am." Elias set the trunk down carefully, avoiding Clara's eyes. Nonsense. You've been up since dawn doing the Lord's work. The least I can do is feed you. Mrs. Peterson was already heading back downstairs, brooking no argument. Elias finally looked at Clara, and something complicated passed across his face. Concern, maybe. Relief that she'd made it through the night. "Morning, Miss Whitfield. You look better than you did last night." Clara was acutely aware that better was relative when you were standing in a borrowed nightgown with unbrushed hair in front of the man who'd saved your life. "I feel better. Thank you for bringing my things." "Wasn't any trouble." He shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable with prolonged conversation. "I'll just head downstairs. Leave you to get dressed." He disappeared before Clara could thank him again, his boots heavy on the stairs. Sarah closed the door and turned to Clara with barely suppressed delight. "Well now, that's the most words I've heard Elias string together in 6 months. You must have made quite an impression." Clara felt her cheeks heat. "He was just being kind. Anyone would have done the same." "You'd think so, wouldn't you?" Sarah began opening the first trunk, revealing Clara's carefully packed dresses. "But kindness isn't as common as it should be, especially not out here. When my husband David had his accident, fell through rotted barn boards and broke his leg in 3 places, it was Elias who rode for the doctor, stayed up all night helping set the bones, then came back every day for 2 weeks to handle our livestock while David healed. Never asked for a penny, never mentioned it again." She pulled out a dove-gray dress with black piping. "This would be perfect for meeting the school board. Conservative but stylish. They'll love you." The dress had been her mother's, altered to fit Clara's slimmer frame. Looking at it brought a sharp pang of grief and gratitude. Her mother had believed in education the way some people believed in salvation. "Knowledge is the one thing no one can take from you," she'd said. "Not poverty, not men, not circumstance." Sarah helped her dress, managing the buttons up the back with practiced efficiency. "Mother says you're from Philadelphia. That's a long way to come." It seemed like a good idea at the time. Clara kept her voice light, unwilling to dive into the full story with a stranger, no matter how kind. "I wanted to teach, and there are more opportunities out here than back east." "That's true enough. We've been without a proper teacher for 8 months since Miss Dorothy married and moved to Cheyenne. The children have been running wild, and their parents are desperate." Sarah pinned up Clara's hair in a simple but elegant style. "There! You look every inch the educated lady." Clara studied herself in the small mirror above the washstand. The woman staring back looked competent, composed. Nothing like the terrified girl who'd collapsed at a way station. It was amazing what a night's sleep and clean clothes could accomplish. Downstairs, Mrs. Peterson's dining room held a long table set for 6. 3 of the seats were occupied by women Clara hadn't met yet, all younger than Mrs. Peterson, all watching her with frank curiosity as she entered. Elias sat at the far end, looking deeply uncomfortable, his large frame making the delicate chair seem comically small. "Ladies, this is Miss Clara Whitfield, our new teacher," Mrs. Peterson announced, setting down a platter of eggs and bacon. "Clara, this is Miss Annie Davis. She works at the general store. Mrs. Martha Green, who does alterations and dressmaking, and Mrs. Helen Winters, our postmistress." A chorus of greetings followed, warm but assessing. Clara understood immediately that she was being evaluated, weighed, measured against whatever expectations small-town Wyoming held for teachers. She smiled and took the empty seat, which happened to be directly across from Elias. "Miss Whitfield had quite an adventure getting here," Mrs. Peterson continued, passing around biscuits. "That Jack Denton abandoned her at the old way station for defending herself against his inappropriate advances." The reaction was immediate and vocal. Annie Davis, a sharp-featured blonde, gasped. Martha Green, plump and maternal, looked genuinely distressed. Helen Winters, gray-haired and severe, pursed her lips in disapproval. "That man is a menace," Helen declared. "This isn't the first time either. Last year he charged the widow Morrison double the fare and left her luggage in Laramie. But the territorial company won't do anything because he's got a contract." "Someone should shoot him," Annie said matter-of-factly, reaching for the butter. "Just saying what we're all thinking." "Annie!" Martha looked scandalized. "Well, it's true. Men like that don't learn unless there are consequences." Annie turned her sharp gaze on Clara. "Good for you standing up to him. Most women don't." Clara picked at her eggs, appetite suddenly gone. I'm not sure it was worth nearly dying over. But you didn't die. This from Elias, who'd been silent until now. Everyone turned to look at him. You stood up for yourself. And then when help came, you were smart enough to take it. That's worth something. The approval in his voice made something warm bloom in Clara's chest. She met his eyes across the table and saw understanding there. Not pity, not condescension, just recognition of one survivor to another. Mrs. Peterson cleared her throat meaningfully. Elias, when you're done eating, would you mind walking Miss Whitfield to the schoolhouse? She should see it before Monday, and you're headed that direction anyway. Elias's ears turned slightly red, but he nodded. Be happy to. The rest of breakfast passed in a blur of questions about Philadelphia, teaching methods, and whether Clara could play piano, a little, or organize a Christmas pageant. I'll certainly try. By the time the meal ended, Clara felt like she'd been interviewed by a benevolent firing squad. These women were clearly the social gatekeepers of Promise Creek, and she'd just passed some invisible test. As the others dispersed to their various duties, Clara retrieved her shawl from upstairs. When she came back down, Elias was waiting on the porch, hat in hand, looking out at the street with that same quiet watchfulness she'd noticed the night before. You don't have to do this, Clara said, joining him. I'm perfectly capable of finding the schoolhouse myself. I know you are. Mrs. Peterson asked me to walk with you, and I don't say no to Mrs. Peterson. A hint of a smile. Nobody does. She's scarier than a grizzly when crossed. They started down the porch steps together. Promise Creek looked entirely different in daylight, smaller and scruffier than Clara's late-night impression, but also more real. The buildings were mostly wood, weathered by wind and sun. The street was hard-packed dirt, rutted from wagon wheels. But there were signs of care, flower boxes on some windows, fresh paint on the general store, a neat wooden sidewalk along the main stretch. It's not Philadelphia, Elias said, reading her expression. No, Clara agreed. But Philadelphia isn't what everyone imagines either. We have slums that would shock you, poverty that makes frontier life look gentle. Why'd you leave? The question was asked casually, but Clara sensed genuine curiosity. She considered lying, giving some pleasant fiction about wanting adventure. But this man had saved her life. He deserved honesty, or at least some version of it. My father is a good man with bad habits. Drinking, gambling, making promises he can't keep. After my mother died, he couldn't manage alone. The debts piled up. There was a man, a merchant, who offered to pay everything if I'd marry him. She kept her voice steady, unemotional. He was 43 with 7 children. I was 19 with a teaching certificate and a strong aversion to indentured servitude masquerading as marriage. Elias was quiet for a moment. So, you ran? I prefer to think of it as making a strategic retreat toward better options. That earned her a real laugh, brief but genuine. Fair enough. And here? This is better? Clara looked around at the dusty street, the rough buildings, the vast empty sky pressing down from all sides. She thought about Jack Denton and the coyotes and falling asleep expecting to die. Then she thought about Mrs. Peterson's kindness, the warm breakfast, the women who'd welcomed her despite her being a stranger. I don't know yet, she admitted. Ask me in 6 months. They walked in companionable silence down Main Street. People nodded to Elias, men mostly, with the occasional wife or shopkeeper. He returned their greetings with quiet courtesy, but didn't stop to chat. Clara noticed he seemed to draw curious glances, as if people weren't used to seeing him with company. The schoolhouse sat at the far end of town, a modest one-room building with a small bell tower and a covered porch. It looked weathered but sturdy, with glass windows that caught the morning light. A pump stood in the yard, and someone had made a half-hearted attempt at a garden that was now mostly weeds. Keys probably under the mat, Elias said, mounting the steps. He was right. A large iron key lay hidden beneath a threadbare welcome mat. He unlocked the door and pushed it open, then stepped aside to let Clara enter first. The interior was dim and dusty, smelling of chalk and old paper and mice. But as Clara's eyes adjusted, she felt something like wonder bloom in her chest. 12 rough wooden desks arranged in 3 rows. a larger desk at the front for the teacher, a blackboard that needed cleaning, shelves holding battered textbooks and slates, a pot-bellied stove in the corner, cold now but promising warmth come winter. It was hers. This space, these possibilities, these yet unknown children who would fill these desks, all hers. "It needs work," Elias said apologetically. "Miss Dorothy left in May and nobody's maintained it since, but the roof's sound and the stove draws well." Clara walked slowly between the desks, running her hand along the scarred wood. "How many children?" 16 last I heard, ages 6 to 14. Most can read a little, write their names, do basic arithmetic, but they're behind where they should be. Then we'll catch them up." Clara opened one of the textbooks. McGuffey's Reader, 3rd edition. Well worn, but serviceable. "What about school board? Mrs. Peterson mentioned them." 3 men. Reverend Aldrich, who's harmless but long-winded, Samuel Hayes, who owns the feed store and cares mostly about practical education, and Judge Crawford, who actually runs things. Elias leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Crawford's fair but exacting. He'll expect regular reports on the children's progress. But if you do right by the kids, he'll support you against any parent complaints." Clara absorbed this, mentally filing away the political landscape she'd need to navigate. "When will I meet them?" "Tomorrow, most likely. Word spreads fast here. They probably already know you arrived." He paused. "They'll want to know about Jack Denton, whether you plan to file a formal complaint." "Should I?" "Depends. You'd be within your rights, and most folks would support you. But Denton has friends, and some of them sit on the territorial council. Could make things complicated for you professionally." Clara turned to face him fully. "Are you suggesting I stay silent? Let him get away with it?" "I'm suggesting you think carefully about battles worth fighting. You just got here. You haven't even met your students yet. Starting off with a public controversy might not be the best introduction." Elias held up a hand before she could interrupt. "I'm not saying he doesn't deserve consequences. I'm saying maybe you establish yourself first. Show them you're a damn good teacher. Or then, if you want to take on Jack Denton, you'll have the whole town behind you instead of just half." It was pragmatic advice, and Clara hated that it made sense. She wanted righteous justice, wanted Denton punished for his cruelty. But Elias was right. She couldn't afford to make enemies before she'd made allies. "Fine," she said tightly. "I'll wait. But I won't forget." "Didn't think you would." Elias pushed off from the doorframe. "You'll need supplies, chalk, paper, new textbooks if the school board will pay for them. The general store's on Main Street. Tell Rebecca I sent you. She's my sister, and she'll treat you fair." Clara blinked at this new information. "Your sister runs the general store?" "Her and her husband, Tim. They've been here 5 years, got 2 little ones." He pulled the door closed behind them as they stepped back outside. "Rebecca's sharp as a tack. Don't let her talk you into buying things you don't need, but do listen when she makes suggestions. She knows this town better than anyone." They walked back toward the boarding house, the morning sun climbing higher. Clara's mind was already churning with plans, lessons to prepare, supplies to inventory, a classroom to clean and organize. She was so absorbed in thought that she nearly walked past Mrs. Peterson's without stopping. "Miss Whitfield?" She turned. Elias had stopped at the gate, hat in his hands again, that same careful expression on his weathered face. "Yes?" "If you need anything at all, Mrs. Peterson knows how to reach me. My ranch is about 3 miles north of town. I'm not much for socializing, but I'm good at fixing things. Broken stoves, stuck windows, whatever." He looked uncomfortable, like he'd said too much. "Just, you're new here, and this place can be harder than you expect." Clara studied him in the full light of day. This man who'd materialized from darkness to save her, who'd been nothing but respectful and kind, who was now offering continued help with no expectation of payment or favor. He couldn't be more than 35, she thought, but he had the bearing of someone who'd lived harder than his years suggested. "Why are you helping me?" The question emerged before she could stop it. "You don't know me. I'm just another stranger passing through." Elias was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft. "My mother came out here alone, young, educated, full of hope. The town mostly welcomed her, but there were a few who made it hard, questioned her methods, spread rumors, made her feel like she didn't belong. She nearly left twice in that first year. But she stayed. She stayed because a few good people stood by her, reminded her why she came, helped her through the hard parts. He met Clara's eyes. I figure that's what we're supposed to do, pass along the kindness we've received. And you remind me of her, same fire, same stubbornness, same determination to make something of yourself no matter what it costs. Before Clara could respond, and she had no idea what she would have said, Elias tipped his hat, turned, and walked away toward where his horse was tied outside the boarding house. She watched him mount up, watched him ride down Main Street with that same easy confidence he brought to everything, watched him disappear around a corner. Well, she murmured to herself, this is going to be complicated. The rest of the day passed in a whirlwind of activity. Clara met the school board that afternoon. Reverend Aldrich was indeed long-winded, delivering a 15-minute speech about moral education before she could get a word in. Samuel Hayes was brusque and practical, wanting assurance she could teach basic math and writing. Judge Crawford, a silver-haired man with sharp eyes, asked pointed questions about her training, her philosophy, and her expectations. Miss Whitfield, he said finally, leaning back in his chair, you're young. You're inexperienced in frontier teaching. You're a woman alone in a rough territory. Some would say you're ill-equipped for this position. Clara lifted her chin. Some would be wrong, Your Honor. I graduated top of my class from one of the finest normal schools in Philadelphia. I've studied pedagogy, child development, and curriculum design. What I lack in frontier experience, I make up for in dedication and adaptability. Give me 3 months. If the children aren't showing clear improvement, you can replace me. Crawford's stern expression cracked into something that might have been approval. 3 months. Agreed. You start Monday at 8 o'clock sharp. Your salary is $35 a month, paid directly to Mrs. Peterson for your room and board, with $10 to you for personal expenses. We'll provide basic supplies. Anything beyond that you'll need to justify to the board. Questions? Just one. What happened to Miss Dorothy, the previous teacher? The three men exchanged glances. Finally, Crawford answered. She married well, caught the eye of a banker from Cheyenne who happened through town, left without finishing the term, which put us in a difficult position. The unspoken message was clear. Don't get any ideas about marriage derailing your teaching duties. Clara nodded, understanding the concern even if she found it insulting. Gentlemen, I came here to teach, not to husband hunt. You have my word. She spent the evening at the general store, meeting Elias's sister Rebecca, a lively woman with her brother's strong features, but none of his quiet reserve. Rebecca talked a mile a minute while pulling items off shelves, offering opinions on everything from the best chalk to the state of Clara's wardrobe. You need practical dresses, Rebecca declared, eyeing Clara's gray dress critically. Pretty is nice, but pretty won't keep you warm come December, or hold up to a classroom full of dirty children. Let me show you some sturdy cotton. I can't afford new dresses, Clara interrupted gently. I have $10 a month for personal expenses, and that needs to cover everything. Rebecca waved this away. I know a widow who sews. She'll make you 2 good work dresses for $3 total, and you can pay her in installments. Trust me, Clara. May I call you Clara? You'll need them. Winter here is no joke, and you'll be walking to that schoolhouse in all weather. By the time Clara left with her arms full of chalk, slates, paper, and 2 textbooks on arithmetic, she'd been thoroughly adopted by Rebecca Hale. You come to Sunday dinner, Rebecca insisted. I want you to meet Tim and the children properly. And if my brother happens to drop by, which he does most Sundays, well, that's just coincidence. The knowing look in Rebecca's eyes made Clara's cheeks warm. Your brother was just being kind. My brother is kind to everyone, but he doesn't look at everyone the way he looked at you this morning when he thought nobody was watching. Rebecca squeezed Clara's hand. Don't read too much into it yet. Elias has been alone a long time. But don't dismiss it either. Good men are rare, and that one's the best I know. Walking back to Mrs. Peterson's in the fading light, Clara's mind whirled with everything that had happened in just over 24 hours. She'd gone from abandoned and terrified to employed and welcomed. She had a position, a place to live, and the beginnings of friendships forming around her. It felt almost too good to be true, like she'd stepped into one of those novels where plucky heroines found happiness against all odds. But this wasn't a novel. This was real life, with real challenges ahead. 16 children who needed teaching, A town that would be watching her every move. Winters that could kill. Isolation that could drive a person mad. And somewhere, 3 days' travel behind her, a father drowning in debt and a merchant who'd expected her to save him from it. One day at a time, she whispered to herself, the same thing her mother used to say when life got overwhelming. One day at a time, and trust the rest will work itself out. That night at supper, Clara met more of Mrs. Peterson's boarders. Miss Annie from breakfast was there, along with 2 others. Miss Sophie Chen, a young Chinese woman who worked as a seamstress, and Mrs. Violet Nash, a war widow who ran Promise Creek's tiny library out of her front parlor. The conversation flowed easily, touching on everything from town gossip to political happenings to a debate about whether Wyoming would ever achieve statehood. Clara mostly listened, absorbing information and personalities, learning the social map she'd need to navigate. "So Clara," Violet said during a lull, "I heard you arrived under dramatic circumstances. Jack Denton's behavior is inexcusable, but Elias Merrick's rescue is already becoming legend. By next week, they'll be saying he fought off a pack of wolves barehanded." Clara laughed despite herself. "It was coyotes, not wolves, and he scared them off with a rifle shot. Very effective, very undramatic." "Still," Annie interjected, "he brought you straight here, made sure you were safe, delivered your trunks first thing this morning, and walked you to the schoolhouse. That's more attention than Elias has paid any woman in 5 years. 5 years? Clara couldn't help asking. The table went quiet. Finally, Mrs. Peterson spoke, her voice gentle. Elias was engaged once to a girl named Catherine Miller. Lovely thing. Came out here with her family in 70. They were planning a spring wedding. Then Catherine caught pneumonia that winter. She was dead within a week. Clara's chest tightened with sympathy. How awful. He took it hard, Violet continued. Blamed himself for bringing her out here, away from proper doctors and hospitals. Threw himself into building his ranch, working from dawn to dark, never courting again. He's been alone ever since, well, alone except for his work and helping others when needed. Ladies, Mrs. Peterson said firmly, let's not matchmake before Clara's even taught her first class. The girl has enough on her plate without you marrying her off to the first kind man she meets. But the seed had been planted, and as Clara lay in bed that night, she couldn't stop thinking about Elias Merrick, about the grief he carried, the loneliness he'd wrapped around himself like armor, about the way he'd looked at her across the breakfast table with something that might have been recognition, one wounded person seeing another. She thought about his hands, strong and careful, steadying her when she'd nearly fallen, his voice, deep and calm, cutting through her panic, his unexpected understanding that surviving required both courage and pragmatism. Don't be foolish, she told herself firmly. You're here to teach, to build a life on your own terms. Romance is the last thing you need. But as sleep finally claimed her, her last conscious thought was of Elias Merrick, riding through darkness to save a stranger, and how his simple kindness had changed everything. The next 2 days blurred together in preparation. Clara cleaned the schoolhouse until her hands were raw, scrubbing desks and floors and windows until everything gleamed. She organized the meager library, arranged her teaching materials, and prepared lesson plans for the first week. She met more townspeople, the blacksmith, the doctor, the saloon keeper's wife who insisted teachers were always welcome at community gatherings to set a good example for the children. On Sunday, she attended church service at Reverend Aldrich's small chapel. The sermon was indeed long-winded, but the congregation was warm and she met many of her future students' parents. They looked at her with a mixture of hope and skepticism. Hope that she could educate their children. Skepticism that a young city woman could survive frontier teaching. After the service, Rebecca pounced. You're coming to dinner. No arguments. The Hale home was a tidy cabin on a side street, full of warmth and noise and the smell of roasting chicken. Rebecca's husband, Tim, was a quiet man with a ready smile. Their children, Lucy, age 4, and Thomas, age 2, were delightful chaos. And Elias, true to his sister's prediction, arrived about an hour after Clara did, carrying fresh vegetables from his ranch garden. Oh, good, you're here, Rebecca said innocently. Clara, would you help me in the kitchen? Elias watched the children for a moment. In the kitchen, Rebecca dropped all pretense. He came. He never comes to Sunday dinner 2 weeks in a row, but he's here. And he brought the good vegetables, the ones he usually saves for himself. Rebecca, we're not. Clara struggled for words. I know. Too soon, too presumptuous, mind my own business. Rebecca checked the chicken, not remotely chastened. But Clara, my brother is the best man I know, and he's been half alive since Catherine died. If you can make him fully alive again, even just as a friend, I'll consider you a miracle worker. Dinner was comfortable, full of easy conversation and children's laughter. Clara found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't since leaving Philadelphia, the simple domesticity soothing something raw inside her. Elias was more talkative with his family, teasing Rebecca gently and letting little Lucy climb all over him while he ate. After the meal, while Rebecca and Tim put the exhausted children down for naps, Claire and Elias found themselves alone on the porch. The afternoon sun was warm, the street quiet with Sunday stillness. Your sister is subtle as a stampede, Clara said dryly. Elias chuckled. She means well. Just ignore her when she gets like this. She loves you. It's sweet, even if it's mortifying. They sat in silence for a while, watching a dog chase a chicken down the dusty street. Finally, Elias spoke. You start tomorrow. You nervous? Terrified, Clara admitted. What if they hate me? What if I can't reach them? What if I'm not good enough? You'll be fine. His certainty was oddly comforting. They're just kids. Treat them with respect. Expect their best, and they'll surprise you. You sound like you know from experience. My mother. I watched her teach for years before she died. Saw how she could take a sullen boy who hated books and turn him into someone who read for pleasure. How she made learning feel like discovery instead of drudgery. He smiled faintly. I was that sullen boy, by the way. Hated school until she showed me it wasn't about memorization. It was about understanding the world. Clara turned to look at him fully. What happened to her? If you don't mind me asking. Fever. Same as a lot of people out here. Sickness comes and there's no doctors close enough or good enough to fight it. His voice was matter-of-fact, but Clara heard the old pain underneath. She lasted 3 days, kept telling me to keep learning, keep growing, keep helping people. Then she was gone. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. He stood, clearly done with emotional conversation. I should head back. Goliath needs feeding, and I've got fences to mend tomorrow. Clara stood too, suddenly not wanting him to leave, which was ridiculous. She barely knew this man. Thank you for dinner, and for everything else. I know I keep thanking you, but you don't need to keep thanking me. Elias settled his hat on his head. Just be a good teacher. That's thanks enough. He was down the porch steps when Clara called after him. Will I see you again? I mean, around town? He turned and something in his expression made her heart skip. I imagine so. It's a small town, and I do need supplies from time to time. Then he was gone, riding off toward his ranch, leaving Clara standing on his sister's porch wondering what exactly had just happened and why she felt so disappointed to see him go. That evening, back at Mrs. Peterson's, Clara laid out her clothes for the morning. The practical gray dress Rebecca had insisted on, her mother's cameo, her hair pinned back severely. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw a teacher, someone competent, someone trustworthy, someone who belonged. Tomorrow, she whispered to her reflection. Tomorrow, it all really begins. And despite the fear, despite the uncertainty, despite everything she'd left behind and everything still unknown ahead, Clara Whitfield smiled. Because for the first time in her 19 years, she was exactly where she wanted to be, doing exactly what she dreamed of doing, with a whole life waiting to be built from nothing but hope and determination. The frontier had tried to kill her. Instead, it had freed her. And tomorrow, she'd start proving that she deserved that freedom. The first child arrived at 7:30, a full half hour before school was meant to begin. Clara was already there, had been since 6:45, arranging and rearranging desks in configurations that never felt quite right. She'd settled on 3 rows of 4, with the largest desks in back for the older students, when she heard boots on the porch steps. Her heart jumped into her throat as she turned to face the door. A boy stood in the doorway, maybe 13 years old, tall and gangly, with dark hair that fell into his eyes. He held his hat in both hands and looked at her with the wary suspicion of someone who'd been disappointed before. You the new teacher? His voice was already changing, cracking on the last word. I am, Miss Whitfield. Clara wiped her dusty hands on her apron and extended one toward him. And you are. He stared at her outstretched hand like she'd offered him a snake, then slowly shook it. His grip was tentative, unused to being treated like an adult. Daniel Cooper. My pa said I had to come, even though I told him I'm needed at home. We got a ranch to run, and my brother's only 10. How old are you, Daniel? 13, almost 14. He said it defensively, like he expected her to challenge him. That's a good age, old enough to understand why education matters. Clara gestured to one of the back desks. Why don't you choose a seat? You'll want good light for reading. I can already read. Still defensive, still waiting for judgment. I'm sure you can, but there's always more to learn. History, science, mathematics beyond basic arithmetic. Things that might help you run that ranch better someday. She kept her voice casual, non-threatening. Unless you plan to leave ranching to someone else? His jaw tightened. It's my land. Well, my pa's land, but it'll be mine someday. Nobody else is going to run it. Then you'll need to know how to calculate feed costs, understand market prices, maybe even navigate contracts with buyers. Clara pulled out a worn copy of an arithmetic text. All of that requires education beyond third-grade math. Daniel's suspicion wavered, replaced by reluctant interest. He chose a desk in the back corner, as far from the teacher as possible while still being in the room, and sat down with exaggerated casualness. But Clara noticed he was watching her, measuring her, deciding whether she might be different from whatever teachers had failed him before. The other children arrived in clusters and pairs. 3 sisters named Emma, Grace, and little Molly Hayes, daughters of the feed store owner, came with their lunch pails swinging. 2 boys who looked like twins, she'd learn later they were cousins, both named James, called Big James and Little James to distinguish them, tumbled through the door mid-argument about something involving a frog. A shy girl with enormous brown eyes introduced herself in a whisper as Sarah Thompson and immediately hid behind her older brother Robert. By 8 o'clock, 14 children ranging from 6 to 14 sat at the desks, watching Clara with expressions that varied from eager to bored to openly hostile. 2 seats remained empty. Good morning, Clara said, standing at the front of the classroom. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. My name is Miss Clara Whitfield. I've come from Philadelphia to teach you, and I'm very glad to be here. Why? The question came from a red-haired girl in the middle row, maybe 11 years old, with sharp eyes and sharper elbows. Nobody comes to Promise Creek unless they're running from something. The room went silent. Clara felt 14 pairs of eyes watching to see how she'd respond to this challenge. She could deflect, could assert her authority, and shut down the question. Instead, she told the truth. You're right. I am running from something. From a life I didn't choose. My mother died and my father wanted me to marry a man I couldn't respect. So I used my teaching certificate to come west, where a woman can make her own choices. She met the red-haired girl's gaze squarely. What's your name? Margaret. Maggie. The girl blinked, clearly not expecting honesty. Well, Maggie, you're also right that everyone comes here running from something. The question is whether we're running towards something better or just running scared. I'm choosing to believe it's the first one. What about you? Maggie considered this, then nodded slowly. My family came because the farm in Ohio failed. Pa says Wyoming's got opportunity if you're tough enough. Then let's be tough enough. Clara picked up a piece of chalk. Now, I need to understand where you all are in your studies. We're going to start with reading. I'm going to write a passage on the board, and I want each of you to copy it onto your slates. Then we'll go around the room and everyone will read one sentence aloud. No judgments, no laughing, we're all here to learn. She wrote out a paragraph from Aesop's Fables, something simple but not condescending. As the children bent over their slates, tongues poking out in concentration, Clara walked between the rows. She noted who copied quickly and confidently, who struggled with spelling, who couldn't seem to grip the chalk properly because their hands were more used to farm tools than writing implements. The door creaked open. A woman entered, dragging 2 reluctant children, a boy about 8 and a girl about 6, both with white blonde hair and matching mulish expressions. The woman herself looked exhausted, too thin, with the worn appearance of someone who'd worked hard for every breath. Sorry we're late, miss. I'm Nancy Miller. These are my two, Joseph and Ruth. They don't want to come, but I told them they're coming anyway. She said this loudly, clearly for her children's benefit. Their pa says school's a waste, but I say reading and writing matter even if you're just farming. Mrs. Miller, thank you for bringing them. Clara addressed the children directly. Joseph, Ruth, please find seats. We're just starting, so you haven't missed anything important. The children slouched to the only remaining desks, radiating resentment. Their mother left with a harried wave, and Clara made a mental note to ask Mrs. Peterson about the Miller family later. The morning progressed in fits and starts. The reading assessment revealed a wider range of abilities than Clara had hoped. Little Molly Hayes, only 6, could barely recognize letters, while Daniel Cooper in the back read at nearly an adult level but pretended not to. The mathematics was even more scattered. Some could add and subtract competently. Others couldn't count past 20 without their fingers. But through it all, Clara felt something unexpected. Joy. This was what she'd trained for, what she'd dreamed about during those long hours at the normal school. These weren't abstract students in a textbook example. They were real children with real needs, and she could help them. At noon, she dismissed them for lunch. Most of the children scattered outside to eat under the cottonwood trees, but Daniel Cooper remained at his desk, picking at what looked like a piece of dried meat and stale bread. Clara had brought her own lunch, Mrs. Peterson's leftover chicken and fresh rolls, but her appetite had vanished, replaced by observation. Daniel, may I ask you something? He looked up warily. I guess. You read better than anyone else in this room. You understood the geometry problem I put on the board that stumped the others. So why are you pretending to be less capable than you are? His face flushed. Don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. Clara sat on the edge of her desk, keeping her voice gentle. You're afraid if you show how smart you are, the other boys will think you're different. Or maybe you're afraid your father will keep you home if he knows you don't need school anymore. The accuracy of her guess showed on Daniel's face. He stared at his lunch, jaw working. My pa says educated men are soft. Says ranching takes muscle, not books. Your pa's wrong, Clara said it bluntly, without apology. The most successful ranchers are the ones who understand business, who can negotiate, who know enough science to improve their herds. Being smart doesn't make you soft. It makes you dangerous to people who want to take advantage of you. Daniel's eyes snapped up to hers, startled by her vehemence. You really believe that? I know that. Back in Philadelphia, I watched educated men run circles around good, honest people who didn't have the knowledge to protect themselves. Your father might be the strongest man in Wyoming, but if he can't read a contract, someone will cheat him eventually. Something shifted in Daniel's expression. The defensive walls came down just slightly. What if I stayed after sometimes, helped you with the little ones in exchange for, I don't know, harder lessons? Clara felt a surge of triumph that she carefully hid. That sounds like a fair arrangement. We could start with advanced mathematics, then maybe Latin if you're interested. Latin's a dead language. What good is that? Latin's the root of half the languages in the world and most scientific terminology. Learn Latin, and you can figure out what words mean just by breaking them down. It's like having a secret code. She paused. But if you'd rather stick with mathematics, that's fine too. No, Daniel shifted uncomfortably. Latin sounds interesting, I guess. The afternoon session focused on history and writing. Clara told them about the Revolutionary War, not as dry facts, but as stories. Ordinary people facing impossible odds, making choices that changed everything. She watched the children lean forward, caught up despite themselves. Even Joseph Miller, who'd scowled all morning, looked interested when she described the winter at Valley Forge. Why'd they stay? Little James asked. If it was so bad, why didn't they just go home? Because some things matter more than comfort. They believed in something, in freedom, in the right to govern themselves, and they decided that belief was worth suffering for. Clara looked around the room. Every one of you comes from people who made that same choice. Your parents and grandparents came west because they believed the freedom and opportunity here was worth the hardship. That makes you brave by inheritance. Emma Hayes raised her hand timidly. Miss Whitfield, my ma says you came here all alone, that you didn't have a husband or family to bring you. Is that true? Clara hesitated, aware she was being tested again. It's true. I came alone because I wanted to teach, and there were no positions available in Philadelphia. Sometimes courage means doing things alone until you find people worth doing them with. Weren't you scared? This from Ruth Miller, speaking for the first time all day. Terrified. Still am sometimes. But fear doesn't mean you're not brave. It means you're doing something that matters. Clara smiled at the little girl. You were scared to come to school today, weren't you? Ruth nodded, wide-eyed. But you came anyway. That's courage. By the time 3 o'clock arrived and Clara dismissed the class, she was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical labor. Her throat was raw from talking, her hand cramped from writing on the board, and her mind felt wrung out from the constant attention required to teach 14 different students at 14 different levels simultaneously. But as she watched them file out, Daniel Cooper pausing at the door to give her a small nod, Maggie declaring loudly that school wasn't completely terrible, little Ruth Miller actually smiling. Clara felt something suspiciously like triumph. She'd survived her first day. More than that, she might have actually reached them. The next 3 weeks blurred together in a pattern that became both exhausting and exhilarating. Clara woke before dawn, walked to the schoolhouse while the streets were still empty, and prepared lessons by lamplight. The children arrived in their predictable patterns, Daniel Cooper early and pretending not to care, the Hayes sisters punctual and pressed, the Miller children dragged in by their determined mother, Joseph still sullen but gradually less so. She discovered that Maggie had a gift for mathematics, solving complex problems faster than students twice her age. Big James, despite his rowdy behavior, could draw with remarkable precision and had an eye for natural science. Sarah Thompson whispered her answers but always got them right, possessing a memory that seemed to capture every word Clara spoke. Even Joseph Miller, hostile and resistant, showed unexpected talent for storytelling when she asked the class to write about their families. My pa came here with nothing but a wagon and a dream, he wrote in painful, labored script. Ma says dreams don't feed kids, but Pa says dreams make the work worth doing. I don't know who's right, maybe both. Clara had to blink back tears when she read it. These children, rough and unpolished as they were, carried their parents' hopes and their own hidden gifts. It was her job to help them discover what they could become. The townspeople watched her progress with keen interest. Parents stopped her on the street to ask about their children. Judge Crawford appeared one afternoon to observe her teaching, sitting in the back for an hour before nodding his approval and leaving without comment. Reverend Aldrich asked her to prepare a special Christmas reading for the church service, calling it an opportunity for the children to demonstrate their progress. Rebecca had her over for Sunday dinner every week, and every week Elias happened to stop by. He never stayed long, never said much, but Clara found herself looking forward to those brief encounters. He'd ask about the schoolhouse. Did the stove draw properly? Were the windows holding against the wind? And she'd update him on small repairs needed. The following week, those repairs would be mysteriously completed. That brother of mine, Rebecca said knowingly after the third week. He fixed your stuck window, didn't he? I don't know for certain it was him. Please, nobody else in this town cares that much about the schoolhouse maintenance. Rebecca kneaded bread dough with unnecessary vigor. He's sweet on you. Stubborn fool won't admit it, but it's plain as day. Clara felt her cheeks warm. We barely know each other, and I'm not here looking for romance. I'm here to teach. Can't you do both? Rebecca shaped the dough into loaves with practiced hands. Or are you one of those modern women who think marriage means giving up everything else? I think marriage means giving up control of your life to a man who may or may not respect your ambitions. Clara's voice came out sharper than she'd intended. I watched my mother subordinate everything to my father's needs. Her intelligence, her dreams, her health, all sacrificed to keep him comfortable. And when she died, he looked for another woman to take her place and make his life easy. Rebecca's hands stilled. Your mother must have been a remarkable woman. She was. She taught me to read before I was 4. She's the reason I became a teacher. Clara stared at the flour dusting the table. I won't let anyone make me smaller, not even for love. Elias wouldn't make you smaller. Rebecca's voice was soft, but certain. His mother was a teacher, remember? He respected her mind more than anything. And when Catherine died, what broke him wasn't losing a wife. It was losing a partner. Someone who challenged him, argued with him, made him think harder about everything. Clara looked up at Rebecca, seeing the earnestness in her face. I'm not trying to replace Catherine. Nobody could. But Clara, being alone isn't the same as being free. Sometimes the right partner makes you bigger, not smaller. Makes your life fuller, not narrower. Rebecca resumed kneading. Just think about it. That's all I'm asking. October bled into November, and Wyoming showed its harsh side. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in a single week. Frost killed the last wildflowers. Morning walks to the schoolhouse required heavy shawls and gloves that made unlocking the door an ordeal. Clara arrived earlier to start the stove, ensuring the room would be warm before the children arrived. One Thursday morning, she woke to find the world transformed. Snow had fallen overnight, blanketing Promise Creek in pristine white that made everything look softer and somehow more silent. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. Beautiful because it looked like something from a Christmas card. Terrifying because she suddenly understood how isolated they really were. The walk to school was treacherous. Clara slipped twice on ice hidden beneath the snow, catching herself at the last moment. The schoolhouse loomed out of the whiteness like a refuge, and she fumbled with cold, numbed fingers to unlock the door. Inside was barely warmer than outside. Her breath plumed in the frigid air. The stove sat cold and indifferent in the corner, mocking her city-bred incompetence with frontier necessities. She'd learned to light it over the past weeks, but this morning her hands were too cold to strike the matches effectively. She broke 3 before getting one lit, and the kindling she'd prepared yesterday had somehow gotten damp. "Come on," she muttered through chattering teeth. "Please, please light." The door opened behind her, letting in a blast of Arctic air along with a snow-covered figure. Clara spun around, heart hammering, and recognized Elias Merrick shaking snow from his hat. "Saw your tracks," he said without preamble. "Figured you might need help with the stove in this cold." "I can manage," Clara said automatically, even as her 4th match broke between frozen fingers. Elias didn't argue, just moved past her to the stove. Within 2 minutes, he had a fire going, the dry wood he'd apparently brought with him catching quickly and spreading warmth. He fed it carefully, adjusting the damper, making it look effortless in a way that made Clara feel both grateful and inadequate. "You'll want to bank it before you leave tonight," he said, still focused on the fire. "Keep coals alive so it's easier to light tomorrow morning. I can show you how." "Why are you here, Elias?" The question came out more blunt than she'd intended. "It's barely 7 in the morning. You have your own ranch to run." He finally turned to look at her, his face ruddy from cold and backlit by growing firelight. "Because it's your first real snow, and I remember my mother struggling with the stove her first winter. She had a husband to help her. You don't." The simple statement hung between them, stripped of any romantic implication, just practical truth. Clara was alone in ways that his mother hadn't been, and winter on the frontier was not the time for pride. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Truly. I was about to panic." "No, you weren't. You'd have figured it out eventually." He stood, brushing soot from his hands. "But this saves time, and your students will be here soon. Some of them walk 3 miles in this weather." As if summoned by his words, children began arriving, red-cheeked and snow-covered, tracking white footprints across the classroom floor. They clustered around the stove, soaking up warmth, and Daniel Cooper noticed Elias first. "Mr. Merrick? What are you doing here?" "Making sure your teacher didn't freeze before you showed up." Elias headed for the door, clearly uncomfortable with attention. "You kids listen to Miss Whitfield. She's smarter than all of you combined." He was gone before Clara could thank him again, leaving only melting snow and lingering warmth from the now roaring stove. Maggie materialized at Clara's elbow, eyes sharp with interest. "Is Mr. Merrick courting you?" "What? No, he was just being kind." "That's what courting looks like out here," Maggie said matter-of-factly. "My pa courted my ma by fixing her wagon wheel and bringing fresh meat. Said romance was nice, but usefulness was better." Several of the other children giggled, and Clara felt her face flush. "Mr. Merrick is a helpful neighbor, nothing more. Now, everyone to your seats. We have lessons to begin." But throughout the day, she found her mind wandering back to Elias standing in her doorway, snow-covered and matter-of-fact, helping without being asked because he'd anticipated need before it became crisis. It was harder to dismiss than grand romantic gestures would have been, this quiet competence that expected nothing in return. That evening, Clara struggled to bank the fire as Elias had described. She thought she'd gotten it right, but the next morning the stove was cold again, and she had to start from scratch. The following evening, she tried a different technique. Still wrong. On the third day, as she was leaving the schoolhouse, Elias was waiting on the porch. "I'm not doing it right," Clara said before he could speak. "The banking. I've tried twice and failed twice." "Mind if I show you again? Slowly this time?" They stood together at the stove, Elias's hands covering hers as he demonstrated the exact angle for positioning the coals, the right amount of ash to smother but not extinguish the fire. Clara was acutely aware of his warmth, his steady breathing, the faint smell of horse and leather and open air that clung to him. "There," he said softly. "Feel how that's different from what you were doing?" "I think so." Her voice came out breathier than she'd intended. "Thank you for being patient. I must seem hopelessly incompetent at frontier life. You walked alone to a way station and survived a night with coyotes. You've taught 14 kids for a month despite having no experience with frontier schools. You're learning to bank a fire in November." He stepped back, releasing her hands. "Seems pretty competent to me." Clara turned to face him, and for a moment they just looked at each other in the dimming light. She saw things she hadn't noticed before. The fine lines around his eyes from squinting into sun and wind, the small scar on his jaw, the way his mouth softened when he forgot to guard his expression. "Elias, Clara, I should—" They both stopped. Both laughed awkwardly. Elias gestured for her to continue. "I was just going to say thank you. Again. I seem to say that a lot around you. And I was going to say I should let you get home before dark. Mrs. Peterson worries." But he didn't move toward the door. "How are you liking teaching? Really?" "It's harder than I imagined and more rewarding than I dreamed." Clara leaned against her desk, grateful for the honesty of the question. "Daniel Cooper stayed after yesterday to work on Latin. He's brilliant, Elias, truly gifted, but he's so afraid of being different that he hides it. His father's hard on him, expects him to be a rancher like 5 generations before him. There's no reason he can't be an educated rancher, or a rancher who becomes something else if he wants." Clara heard the passion creeping into her voice. "These children have so much potential, but everyone keeps telling them to think small, dream small, want small things." "Not everyone." Elias was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You're telling them different. Word gets around, parents talking about how you made Sarah Thompson speak up in class, how you convinced Joseph Miller that writing matters. You're changing things, Clara, not just teaching reading and arithmetic, changing how these kids see themselves." The approval in his voice made something warm bloom in Clara's chest. "I'm trying. Some days I'm not sure it's enough." "It's enough." He said it with such certainty that she almost believed him. "My mother used to say one good teacher could change the trajectory of a child's entire life. You're that teacher for these kids." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of his words settling around them. Then Elias cleared his throat, breaking the spell. "I should go. But Clara, if you need anything this winter, anything at all, send word through Rebecca. Promise Creek gets cut off sometimes when the snow's bad. Don't be too proud to ask for help." "I won't." She walked him to the door. "And Elias, Rebecca's been inviting me for Sunday dinner for weeks. I think she's matchmaking." He groaned. "She's subtle as a mule kick, my sister. You don't have to come if it makes you uncomfortable." "I didn't say it made me uncomfortable." Clara surprised herself with the words. "Just wanted to make sure you knew what we were walking into." Elias's face did something complicated. Surprise, pleasure, uncertainty, hope, all flickering across his features too fast to track. "Well then, guess I'll see you Sunday." He left, and Clara stood in the doorway watching him ride away through the snow-covered street, wondering what exactly she'd just agreed to and why the prospect terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. November deepened into serious cold. The children came to school bundled in layers, their noses red and their fingers stiff. Clara learned to keep a pot of water warming on the stove so they could thaw their hands before trying to write. She learned which students walked the longest distances and made sure to keep them closest to the heat. She learned that Joseph Miller's surliness was partly hunger. His family struggled more than most, and started forgetting half her lunch where he could take it without losing pride. The lessons evolved too. She taught them geography using maps she'd brought from Philadelphia, showing them where they fit in the larger world. She taught them science by studying the snow itself, why it formed, how ice crystals grew, what made Wyoming winter so brutal. She taught them writing by having them document their own lives, preserving in ink the daily realities of frontier childhood. When historians look back 100 years from now, she told them, they'll want to know what it was really like. Not the sanitized versions in books, but the truth. You're writing that truth. Daniel Cooper wrote about the morning he'd found a calf frozen in a snowbank, despite his father's best efforts to protect the herd. Emma Hayes wrote about her mother teaching her to sew by lamplight while her father read aloud. Ruth Miller wrote 4 simple sentences about being afraid of the dark and how her brother sang to her until she fell asleep. Clara collected their papers like treasures, recognizing them for what they were, small windows into lives that would otherwise be forgotten, stories that mattered even if no historian ever read them. The Sunday before Thanksgiving, Clara arrived at Rebecca's house to find it more crowded than usual. Tim's brother was visiting with his family. Rebecca's oldest friend and her husband had come from a neighboring ranch, and Elias was there, looking uncomfortable in the crowd but staying anyway. "Clara!" Rebecca swept her into the chaos. "Come meet everyone. This is my oldest friend Margaret and her husband John. They ranch about 10 miles out. Margaret and I came west on the same wagon train." The afternoon passed in a blur of food and conversation and children running underfoot. Clara found herself drawn into discussions about teaching methods, frontier politics, the prospect of Wyoming statehood. She held her own, arguing passionately about women's suffrage and educational funding, aware of Elias watching her from across the room with something that looked like admiration. After dinner, while the others cleaned up, Clara found herself on the porch with Elias, both of them escaping the crowded warmth for a moment of cold clarity. "You're good with people," Elias observed. "Even when you disagree with them, they like you." "My mother's skill. She could argue theology with the minister and have him laughing by the end." Clara pulled her shawl tighter against the bite of wind. "I think she would have liked it here. The frontier, I mean. The freedom to speak your mind. Would she have liked Promise Creek?" Clara considered this honestly. "I think she would have found it rough. She loved culture, art, music, things we had access to in Philadelphia, but she also valued substance over style. She'd have respected the people here, their grit." "What about you?" Elias turned to face her fully. "Do you like it here? Or are you still deciding?" "I like it more than I expected to." Clara met his gaze, something unspoken passing between them. "The teaching is everything I hoped for. The people are kinder than I deserved, given how I arrived. And the place itself, it's harsh, but there's beauty in that harshness, honesty. It gets harder before it gets easier. January, February, those are the brutal months. People go a little crazy from being shut in. Tempers run short." He paused. "I'm not trying to scare you. Just want you to know what's coming. I appreciate that. But Elias, I'm not the girl who arrived here 2 months ago. I'm stronger now, more capable." She smiled. "Thanks in part to you. You keep showing up when I need help, but you never make me feel weak for needing it. That's a rare gift." "Clara, He stopped, struggling with words. "When I found you at that way station, you were the bravest person I'd ever seen. Terrified but brave. And watching you these past weeks teaching those kids, learning this life, you're even braver than I thought." That's high praise from someone who's survived out here for years. Surviving's different from living. I've been surviving since Catherine died, just going through motions, doing what needed doing, not letting myself feel much of anything. He looked out at the snow-covered street, his profile sharp against the twilight. "Then you showed up, and I started feeling things again. Started wanting things." Clara's heart was hammering. "What things?" Before he could answer, the door burst open and Rebecca appeared, oblivious to the moment she was interrupting. You two will freeze to death out here. Come inside for pie. I made 3 kinds and they won't eat themselves. The spell broken, Elias stepped back and gestured for Clara to precede him inside. But as she passed, he caught her hand briefly, squeezing it once before letting go. That single gesture, that moment of connection, stayed with Clara all through dessert and goodbyes and the walk home through darkness. She lay in bed that night thinking about Elias Merrick, about the grief he carried and the careful way he was opening himself to possibility again, about how terrifying and wonderful it was to realize she was part of that possibility. Don't rush this, she told herself firmly. You have a whole life to build. Focus on that. But her dreams were full of strong hands and quiet competence and a voice saying, I started wanting things. And somewhere across town, Elias Merrick lay awake thinking about a woman who'd chosen courage over comfort, who taught children to dream bigger than their circumstances, who made him believe that maybe surviving could become living again if he was brave enough to reach for it. The next morning, the first real blizzard hit Promise Creek like God's own fury. Clara woke to a sound like the world ending. Wind howled around Mrs. Peterson's boarding house with a fury that made the windows rattle in their frames. Snow drove against the glass so hard it sounded like sand, and the temperature had dropped so far that frost crystallized on the inside of her window despite the fire downstairs. She could barely see the building across the street through the white chaos. Mrs. Peterson was already up when Clara came down, stoking the parlor fire and looking worried. This is a bad one. Came in overnight without much warning. I don't think you should try for the schoolhouse today, dear. But the children won't be coming either. Their parents aren't foolish enough to send them out in this. Mrs. Peterson pressed a cup of hot coffee into Clara's hands. This is Wyoming teaching you respect, Clara. When the weather says stay home, you stay home. No argument. The other boarders emerged gradually, gathering near the fire in their robes and shawls. Even practical Annie Davis looked shaken. I've seen bad storms, but this one's vicious. Came up too fast. The day stretched long and restless. Clara tried to work on lesson plans, but couldn't concentrate. She kept thinking about the schoolhouse, whether the fire had gone out, whether snow was getting in through some crack she hadn't noticed. She thought about her students scattered across Promise Creek and beyond, hoped they were all safe and warm. Most of all, she thought about Elias alone at his ranch 3 miles north. He'd be checking on his animals, making sure they had shelter, fighting through the storm to keep things alive. She told herself he'd done this 100 times before, that he knew how to survive Wyoming's worst. But worry gnawed at her anyway. By evening, the storm hadn't let up. If anything, it had intensified. Mrs. Peterson made a hearty stew for dinner, and the women gathered close to share body heat and companionship. Sophie Chen told stories about storms in China. Violet Nash read aloud from a novel. Clara tried to join in the camaraderie, but part of her mind stayed fixed on that ranch 3 miles north. The storm lasted 3 days. 3 days of wind that never stopped screaming. 3 days of snow that piled so high it covered the first-floor windows. 3 days of being trapped inside with nothing to do but wait and worry and wonder if this was what frontier winters were really like. Long stretches of enforced stillness punctuated by moments of terror. On the morning of the 4th day, Clara woke to silence. The wind had stopped. She rushed to the window and saw a world transformed and terrifying in its beauty. Snow had drifted as high as the porch roof in places, sculpted by wind into bizarre shapes. The street was invisible, buried under a blanket of white that showed no trace of the town beneath. A few other buildings were visible, smoking chimneys, the only sign of life. Mrs. Peterson surveyed the scene grimly. We'll need to dig out. The men will start with the main street, making paths between buildings. Give it a day or two before you try for the schoolhouse. But Clara's thoughts had gone immediately to her students. Mrs. Peterson, the Miller family. They live outside town, don't they? In that cabin near the creek? Yes, about a mile east. Why? Their mother brings them no matter what. Even when they're sick, even when... Clara's chest tightened with realization. What if she tried to bring them during the storm? What if they got caught? Mrs. Peterson's face went pale. Surely Nancy wouldn't be that foolish. Surely she'd have kept them home. But they both knew that hope and certainty were different things. Nancy Miller, desperate for her children to have the education she'd never received, might have tried to push through, might have thought she could make it before the storm worsened. Might have made a fatal error in judgment that people made every winter in Wyoming. Clara was pulling on her warmest clothes before conscious thought caught up with action. I need to check on them. Clara, you can't. The snow's too deep and you don't even know the way properly. Mrs. Peterson grabbed her arm. We'll send word to the men. They'll organize a search if needed. That could take hours. If the Millers are in trouble... Clara didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. They both understood what 3 days in this cold could do. The front door banged open, letting in a blast of Arctic air and a snow-covered figure. Clara's heart leaped as she recognized Elias, ice crusted in his beard and exhaustion carved into his face. Mrs. Peterson, I need to know, did all the school children make it home before the storm hit? His voice was hoarse, urgent. We think so. But Clara's worried about the Miller family. Elias's eyes found Clara, and something passed between them, shared fear, shared purpose. Nancy Miller's got more determination than sense sometimes. If she tried to bring those kids to school Monday morning, we have to check. Clara finished pulling on her boots. I'm coming with you. The hell you are. It's dangerous out there. Those are my students, my responsibility. Clara met his gaze without flinching. And you can't check every family alone. You'll need help. They stared at each other, wills clashing silently. Finally, Elias cursed under his breath. Fine, but you do exactly what I say, exactly when I say it. This isn't Philadelphia, Clara. This cold will kill you in minutes if you're not careful. Mrs. Peterson bundled Clara in extra scarves and made her promise to turn back at the first sign of trouble. Then they were outside, and Clara understood immediately why Elias had looked so worried. The cold was unlike anything she'd experienced. It bit through her layers in seconds, made her lungs hurt with each breath, froze the moisture in her nose. The snow was thigh-deep in places, requiring exhausting effort to push through. Elias had his horse Goliath, and they took turns riding and walking to share the burden. Talk to me, Elias said as they struggled toward the edge of town. Keep talking so I know you're staying conscious. About what? Anything. Your childhood, your favorite book, whatever keeps your mind working. So Clara talked, her voice muffled by scarves, about her mother teaching her to read using Shakespeare because if you're going to learn words, learn the best ones. About sneaking into her father's library to read books deemed inappropriate for young ladies. About the day she decided to become a teacher, watching her mother help a neighbor's child learn to write his name. She made it look like magic, Clara said through chattering teeth. One moment the boy saw meaningless marks on paper. The next he understood those marks had power. Could preserve thought, could communicate across distance and time. His face when he wrote his own name for the first time, I wanted to create that moment for other children. You have, Elias said. I've seen it. That look on Ruth Miller's face when she finally understood subtraction. Magic, just like you said. They pushed on through the white wasteland. Promise Creek disappeared behind them. The Miller cabin should have been visible by now, but Clara saw nothing but endless snow and scattered trees bent under white burden. There. Elias pointed to a slight depression in the snow. That's the creek bed. Their cabin's just beyond it. The cabin emerged from the whiteness like something from a nightmare. Snow had drifted against one side nearly to the roof. The chimney showed no smoke. The windows were dark. Elias dismounted and waded through the drifts to the door, Clara struggling after him. He pounded hard. Nancy Miller, are you in there? Silence. He tried the door, locked or blocked. He moved to the window, brushed away snow, and peered inside. His face went grim. What? What do you see? Clara pushed beside him, and her heart stopped. Nancy Miller lay on the floor near the cold stove, two small shapes huddled against her. None of them were moving. No, Clara breathed. No, no, no! Elias was already moving, shouldering the door with his full weight. It gave on the third try, and they tumbled into the dim interior. The cold inside was barely less than the cold outside. The stove held only dead ash. Frost covered the walls. Clara dropped beside Nancy and the children, pulling off her gloves to check for pulses with shaking fingers. They're alive! Oh, God, they're alive, but so cold! Nancy's eyes fluttered open, confused and unfocused. Miss Whitfield? How? Don't talk. Save your strength. Clara looked at Elias desperately. We need heat, now. Elias was already at the stove, working with wood and kindling that Nancy had stacked nearby. His hands moved with practiced efficiency even as his face showed the urgency of the situation. I need you to get them warmed up slowly. Not too fast or their hearts could give out. Start with core temperature, chest and abdomen. Clara had no idea how he knew this, but she trusted him absolutely. She pulled the children, Joseph and Ruth, both terrifyingly still, closer together, and lay on top of them, using her body heat to warm them gradually. Nancy tried to help, but was too weak, collapsing back with a moan. What happened? Clara asked her. Why didn't you keep the fire going? Wood ran out. Nancy's voice was barely a whisper. Henry, my husband, was supposed to be back 3 days ago. Went to Fort Laramie for work. Left us enough wood for 5 days, but the storm came early and I couldn't... She started crying, hopeless tears that froze on her cheeks. I couldn't get more. It stacked outside, but I couldn't break through the drifts. The children got colder and colder, and I thought we'd die. Thought I'd killed my babies because I was too weak to save them. You kept them alive, Clara said fiercely. You did that, Nancy. You kept them breathing. We'll handle the rest. The stove finally caught, and Elias fed it carefully, building heat without overwhelming the frozen space. Clara, there's blankets on the bed. Get them. They wrapped the children in layers, holding them close, willing warmth into their small bodies. Joseph stirred first, his eyes opening with confusion and fear. Mama? I'm here, baby. I'm here. Nancy pulled him close, sobbing with relief. Ruth took longer. Clara held her against her chest, talking to her constantly. Come on, Ruth. Come back. You have so many stories left to write, remember? You were going to tell me about the summer you found that bird's nest. Come on, sweetheart. Come back. Finally, Ruth's eyes opened. Miss Whitfield, why are you crying? Clara laughed through tears she hadn't realized she was shedding. Because I'm so happy to see you, Ruth. So very happy. Elias appeared with hot water he'd somehow heated on the now roaring stove. Get this into them. Small sips. Nancy, too. The next hour was focused entirely on warming the Miller family back to life. Clara made weak tea from Nancy's stores and got it into them sip by sip. Elias brought in armload after armload of the wood that was stacked outside, ensuring they'd have heat for days. He checked the cabin for other problems, finding places where wind had gotten through chinks in the walls and stuffing them with rags. Henry should be horsewhipped for leaving you with so little, Elias muttered, examining the nearly empty larder. There's barely any food here. He didn't know the storm would come early, Nancy said weakly, defensive even now. He's a good man. Things have been hard. Clara and Elias exchanged glances. Whatever Henry Miller's virtues, leaving his family this vulnerable showed terrible judgment at best. Nancy, you and the children need to come back to town, Clara said firmly. At least until Henry returns. Mrs. Peterson will have room. I can't abandon our home. What if Henry comes back and we're not here? Then he'll come to town looking for you, and he'll find you safe instead of frozen. Clara's voice was sharp with anger she was trying to control. You nearly died. Your children nearly died. I'm not asking, Nancy. I'm telling you. You're coming with us. Nancy was too weak to argue further. Within the hour, they had the family bundled for travel. Joseph could walk with help. Ruth had to be carried. Nancy leaned heavily on Clara as they struggled back through the snow toward Promise Creek. The journey back was even more grueling than the journey out. Elias carried Ruth on the horse while Clara and Nancy walked, supporting each other, with Joseph between them. The cold seemed to have intensified, or maybe Clara was just more exhausted, more aware of how close they'd all come to tragedy. They finally reached town as twilight fell. Mrs. Peterson took one look at the Miller family and went into full maternal crisis mode, hustling them inside, stripping off wet clothes, wrapping them in blankets, forcing hot soup down their throats. Clara collapsed into a chair near the fire, too exhausted to move. Every muscle ached. Her fingers and toes burned as sensation returned. She couldn't stop shaking, and not entirely from cold. Elias dropped into the chair beside her, looking equally wrecked. You did good out there. We both did. Clara turned to look at him, seeing the exhaustion and something else in his face. How did you know to come check? How did you know to ask about the school children? Been through too many winters not to know how people think. Nancy Miller's determination is admirable but dangerous. When the storm hit, I had a bad feeling. He rubbed his face tiredly. Soon as I could get through this morning, I came to town. If you hadn't been worried too, if we'd waited even a few more hours. He didn't finish, didn't need to. You saved them, Clara said quietly. If you hadn't thought to check, if you hadn't known what to do, we saved them, Elias corrected. I couldn't have gotten them back alone. And they needed you, Clara. Needed to see their teacher cared enough to come for them. That mattered as much as the physical rescue. Mrs. Peterson appeared with hot tea and brandy. Drink this, both of you. Doctor's checking the Millers now. He says they'll recover, thanks to you two. Clara, you're a hero. I'm an idiot who didn't realize how dangerous winter could be. Clara accepted the spiked tea gratefully. Mrs. Peterson, where will they stay? Nancy said they can't pay. They'll stay here until Henry returns, and I won't hear a word about payment. This is what community means, Clara. We take care of our own. She looked between Clara and Elias with an expression that was hard to read. Both of you get some rest. You've earned it. Over the next few days, as the Miller family slowly recovered, the full story emerged. Henry Miller had indeed gone to Fort Laramie for work, backbreaking construction that paid desperately needed money. He'd planned to return before any storms hit, but his employer had kept extending the job, dangling more money that Henry couldn't afford to refuse. By the time he tried to leave, the blizzard had trapped him there just as thoroughly as it had trapped his family in Promise Creek. He's a good man, Nancy repeated to anyone who'd listen, and Clara believed her. But good men could make bad choices, and Henry Miller's choice to leave his family so vulnerable had nearly cost them everything. The children recovered quickly, resilient in the way of the young. Within 3 days, Ruth was asking about school, and Joseph was complaining about being cooped up inside. Clara visited them daily, bringing books and lessons, refusing to let their education lapse, even in crisis. On one visit, she found Ruth writing carefully on a piece of paper. What are you working on? A story, like you asked us to write. Ruth showed her the paper shyly. It's about being cold and scared, and then you coming. You looked like an angel, Miss Whitfield, an angel in a storm. Clara had to blink hard against sudden tears. Oh, Ruth, you're the angel. You and Joseph both. You survived something terrible. Because Mama kept us warm, and because you came. Ruth looked at her with those enormous brown eyes. Mr. Merrick came too. Are you going to marry him? The question was so unexpected that Clara nearly choked. What? No, why would you ask that? Because he looks at you the way Papa looks at Mama, like you're the best thing he ever saw. Clara didn't know how to respond to that, so she changed the subject. But Ruth's words stayed with her, echoing in her mind at odd moments. Did Elias look at her that way? And if he did, how did she feel about it? School reopened a week after the storm. The children came back with stories of being snowed in, of helping their parents with storm preparations, of the fear and excitement of Wyoming's fury. Clara wove these stories into lessons about weather, about survival, about the science of snow and wind. You all experienced something remarkable, she told them, something that most people in the world will never experience. Write about it. Draw it. Help me understand what it was like for you. The resulting work was some of the best they'd done. Daniel Cooper wrote a technical analysis of storm patterns that showed genuine scientific thinking. Maggie drew detailed diagrams of snowdrifts and wind effects. Even Joseph Miller, still shaken, wrote movingly about his mother's courage and his terror. We thought we'd die, he wrote. I tried to be brave for Ruth, but I was so scared. Then Miss Whitfield came, and I knew we'd be okay. Teachers aren't supposed to be heroes, but she is. Clara kept that paper in her desk, reading it whenever she doubted whether she was making a difference. Henry Miller returned 10 days after the storm, haggard and guilt-ridden. He came to the schoolhouse to thank Clara personally, his hat crushed between work-roughened hands. Miss Whitfield, I don't have words for what you did, what you and Elias Merrick did. You saved my family. You should have been here, Mr. Miller. Clara didn't soften it. Your wife and children nearly froze to death because you left them vulnerable. I know. God help me, I know. His face crumpled. I thought I was doing right, earning money we need. But I nearly lost everything for a few dollars. Nancy won't hardly look at me. Clara felt her anger soften slightly. Henry Miller wasn't a bad man, just a desperate one who'd gambled wrong. Then make it right. Make sure it never happens again. Your family needs you here more than they need money from Fort Laramie. Yes, ma'am. You have my word. Whether that word would hold remained to be seen, but at least Henry seemed genuinely chastened. The Millers moved back to their cabin with enough firewood stacked to last months, and a promise from several townsmen to check on them regularly. December arrived with gentler weather. The brutal cold eased into something merely uncomfortable. Snow fell more softly, prettily, like something from a Christmas card instead of a death sentence. Promise Creek came back to life. People venturing out for social calls and shopping and church services. Clara threw herself into preparing for the Christmas program that Reverend Aldrich had requested. She had the children practicing readings, memorizing poems, preparing songs. It gave structure to their days and excitement to look forward to, something the whole town could celebrate together after the storm's harsh reminder of mortality. Elias continued appearing at unpredictable intervals, always with some excuse. The stove needed checking. One of the window frames had come loose in the storm. He'd brought fresh venison that his sister thought Clara should have. Each visit was brief, practical, and left Clara wanting more. Rebecca continued her matchmaking with barely concealed glee. You should see how he talks about you when you're not around. Clara did this with the students. Clara handled that situation so well. It's Clara this and Clara that. The man's smitten. Rebecca, please, we're friends, barely that. We've known each other less than 3 months. Some people know in 3 minutes, some take 3 years. Time doesn't matter as much as truth. Rebecca wrapped Christmas packages with decisive movements. And the truth is, my brother's been half dead since Catherine, and you're bringing him back to life whether you mean to or not. I'm not trying to replace her, Clara said for what felt like the 100th time. Nobody could replace Catherine, but Clara, hearts are big enough for more than one love. The love he had for her doesn't stop him from growing a different love for you. Rebecca tied off a ribbon with a flourish. The question is whether you'll let yourself feel it back. That was the question, wasn't it? Clara lay awake nights thinking about it. She'd come west to escape one man's expectations and build her own life. Getting tangled up with Elias Merrick, kind, competent, grieving Elias, hadn't been part of any plan. But then again, falling asleep at a way station expecting to die hadn't been part of the plan either. And that had led to everything good in her current life. Maybe, she thought, the best things came unplanned. Maybe choosing to trust was its own kind of courage. Sunday before Christmas, Clara arrived at Rebecca's for dinner to find the house festive with evergreen branches and red ribbons. Tim and the children were decorating enthusiastically, if not skillfully. And Elias was there early, helping lift Tim's daughter Lucy so she could place a star on top of the small tree. Clara! Lucy shrieked with delight, wriggling out of Elias's arms to run over. We're making it beautiful. Uncle Elias brought the tree and Mama made cookies, and tonight we'll sing carols. The afternoon dissolved into warm chaos. They ate ham and potatoes and Rebecca's famous rolls. They sang carols around the piano that Rebecca played with more enthusiasm than skill. They drank mulled cider and told stories and watched Lucy and Thomas fight over who got to hang the next ornament. It was, Clara realized, the first real Christmas feeling she'd had since her mother died. The Whitfield household had been somber after that, her father too lost in grief and drink to celebrate much. But this was joy. Messy, loud, imperfect joy. She looked across the room and found Elias watching her, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. Ruth Miller had been right. He did look at her like she was the best thing he'd ever seen, like she was starlight and hope and possibility all wrapped in imperfect human form. And Clara realized with sudden clarity that she looked at him the same way. After dinner, while the others put the children to bed, Clara and Elias found themselves alone by the fire. The singing and laughter faded to a distant hum. The firelight painted everything in soft gold. And for once, they had time and space to actually talk without interruption or crisis or excuse. Clara, Elias started, then stopped. Started again. I need to tell you something. Her heart was pounding. I'm listening. When I found you at that way station, I thought I was just doing the decent thing, helping someone in trouble. No different than a dozen other times I'd helped folks. He stared into the fire, his profile sharp and honest. But then you woke up in my wagon, terrified but brave, and you demanded to know where I was taking you, and something in me, shifted. Clara waited, barely breathing. I'd been alone so long it felt normal, safe. I couldn't hurt if I didn't feel, couldn't lose if I didn't have. His voice went rough. But you made me want to feel again. Want to have. And that scared the hell out of me. It scares me too, Clara admitted quietly. I came here to be independent, to build my own life on my own terms. I didn't want to need anyone. But we all need people, Clara. That's not weakness, it's human. Elias finally turned to look at her. What happened with the Millers? Going out into that storm together. I couldn't have done that alone. Not really. We were stronger together than either of us could have been apart. I know. Claire's voice was barely above a whisper. I've been thinking the same thing. I'm not asking for promises. I know it's too soon, and you deserve time to be sure. Elias took a breath like he was about to jump off a cliff. But I'm asking permission to court you properly, to see if this thing between us could become something real. Clara looked at this man who'd saved her life and never mentioned it, who'd fixed her stove and taught her to survive, who'd ridden into a blizzard to protect children that weren't his own. She thought about his quiet competence, his unexpected understanding, the way he saw her as fully capable while still offering support. She thought about how he'd loved before and survived losing it, and how brave he was to risk loving again. Yes, she said simply. Yes, you have permission. The smile that broke across Elias's face was like sunrise, transforming everything. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. His palm was calloused, warm, steady. Everything about him was steady. I'll do this right, he promised. Properly. The way you deserve. Just don't disappear on me, Clara said, squeezing his hand. I've gotten used to you showing up when I least expect it. I'm not going anywhere, not unless you send me away. They sat like that, hands joined, fire crackling, until Rebecca's voice called them back for more singing. But everything had changed, and as they rejoined the family gathering, Clara felt like she was walking in a dream. A good dream. One she'd never quite imagined but had been waiting for all along. The next week passed in a blur of Christmas preparations and stolen glances. Elias came to town more frequently, always with some legitimate errand, but managing to stop by the schoolhouse. They didn't hide their courtship, but they didn't advertise it either, content to let it unfold naturally while the town watched with benevolent interest. The Christmas program arrived on a crisp Friday evening. The church was packed, every family in Promise Creek and some from outlying ranches. The children performed beautifully, their readings clear and confident. Ruth Miller recited A Visit from St. Nicholas without missing a word. Daniel Cooper read from Luke's Gospel with surprising feeling. Even Joseph Miller, sullen Joseph, who'd hated school just 3 months ago, sang in the choir with something approaching enthusiasm. Afterward, Judge Crawford approached Clara with rare approval on his stern face. Miss Whitfield, I must say you've exceeded our expectations. The children are not only learning, they're thriving. You have our gratitude. Other parents echoed the sentiment, shaking her hand, thanking her for believing in their children. Nancy Miller hugged her with tears streaming down her face. You saved them twice, from the storm and from ignorance. I'll never forget what you've done for us. Clara felt overwhelmed and humbled and proud all at once. This was why she'd become a teacher. Not for recognition, but for the quiet satisfaction of knowing she'd made a difference. These children would remember learning to read, to write, to think. They'd carry that knowledge into whatever futures they built. That mattered more than anything. She found Elias waiting at the edge of the crowd, holding 2 cups of punch and smiling. You look happy. I am. I really, truly am. Clara accepted the punch gratefully. Is this what belonging feels like? Actually being part of something bigger than yourself? I think so. He glanced around at the gathering, at the families and friends celebrating together. Welcome to Promise Creek, Clara, officially. I think I've been here for a while, she said, looking up at him. I just didn't realize it until now. They stood together watching the festivities, two people who'd found each other in unlikely circumstances and were building something neither had expected. The future stretched ahead, full of Wyoming winters and teaching challenges and all the hard work of making a life in a rough land. But for tonight, under the soft glow of Christmas candles, surrounded by community and possibility, Clara Whitfield felt something she hadn't felt since her mother died. Peace. She was exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do, with exactly the right person standing beside her. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The new year arrived with deceptive gentleness, as if Wyoming was apologizing for November's brutality. January brought cold but manageable weather, clear skies that made the snow sparkle like diamonds, and a kind of crystalline beauty that took Clara's breath away every morning on her walk to school. Elias's courtship was steady and unhurried, like everything else about him. He came to town every Sunday for dinner at Rebecca's, staying longer each week. He brought Clara books he thought she'd enjoy, asked thoughtful questions about her teaching, listened with genuine interest when she talked about her students' progress. There were no grand romantic gestures, but there was something better: consistency. The quiet promise of someone who showed up, who kept his word, who made her feel seen and valued without trying to change her. They took walks when weather permitted, always properly chaperoned by the watchful eyes of Promise Creek. They sat together at church, their shoulders touching in the crowded pew. They talked about everything: his ranch and her classroom, their lost parents and uncertain futures, books and philosophy, and whether Wyoming would ever achieve statehood. "What do you want, Clara?" Elias asked one Sunday afternoon as they walked the perimeter of town, fresh snow crunching under their boots. 5 years from now, 10 years, what does your life look like? Clara considered the question carefully. 3 months ago, she would have answered without hesitation: teaching, independence, a life built entirely on her own terms. But now the answer was more complicated, layered with new possibilities she hadn't allowed herself to imagine. "I want to keep teaching. That's non-negotiable." She watched her breath plume in the cold air. "But I also want connection, community, maybe even family someday, though that terrifies me." "Well, why does it terrify you?" "Because I watched my mother disappear into being a wife and mother. She was brilliant, Elias. She could have done anything, but she poured all of herself into my father and me. And when she died, it was like she'd never existed outside of us. No one remembered her dreams, her intelligence, her own identity." Elias was quiet for a moment. "My mother managed both. She was a teacher and a wife and a mother, and she never disappeared. My father respected her mind, supported her work. They were partners." "Your parents sound extraordinary." "They were ordinary people who chose to see each other as equals." He stopped walking, turning to face her. "Clara, I'm not your father. I would never ask you to make yourself smaller. The woman I fell for is brave and stubborn and passionate about teaching. Why would I want to change that?" The words "fell for" hung in the cold air between them, weighted with meaning. Clara's heart did something complicated in her chest. "You fell for me?" Her voice came out softer than intended. "Completely. Probably from the moment you woke up in my wagon demanding answers, scared but refusing to show it." His eyes were steady on hers. "I know it's only been 4 months. I know we're still learning each other. But Clara, I'm not uncertain about how I feel. I'm just waiting for you to catch up." Clara should have felt pressured, trapped. Instead, she felt freed. There was no game playing here, no manipulation, just honest feeling honestly expressed, with space for her to respond in her own time. "I'm catching up," she admitted, "faster than I expected. You make me want things I didn't think I could want." "What things?" "A life that's mine, but also shared. Teaching that's supported rather than resented. Someone who sees my independence as strength instead of threat." She took a breath. "You, Elias. I want you." His smile was like spring breaking through winter. He reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together even through the gloves. "Then you have me. For as long as you'll keep me." They walked back toward town, hand in hand, and Clara felt something settle in her chest. Not the loss of freedom she'd feared, but the gain of partnership. The understanding that love didn't have to diminish. It could expand. making room for more versions of yourself than you'd imagine possible. February tested that understanding. The month brought the brutal cold Elias had warned about, temperatures that made January seem mild. It also brought a letter from Philadelphia that Mrs. Peterson handed Clara with obvious concern. Clara recognized her father's handwriting immediately, the slanted script that always looked like it was sliding downhill. She took it to her room before opening it, bracing herself for whatever news it contained. The letter was short and painfully typical. Her father was in trouble again, deeper this time. Bernard Ashworth had finally lost patience and was calling in debts, threatening legal action. Her father's health was failing from the drink. He needed money. He needed her. He needed her to come home and fix everything by agreeing to the marriage she'd fled. Clara read it twice, feeling emotions war inside her. Guilt warred with anger. Obligation warred with self-preservation. The girl who'd left Philadelphia would have felt crushed by this, overwhelmed by impossible responsibility. But the woman she'd become in Promise Creek felt something different: clarity. She wasn't responsible for her father's choices. She couldn't save him by sacrificing herself. And going back, giving up teaching, giving up the life she'd built, giving up Elias, wouldn't actually help. It would just feed her father's dependence and destroy her in the process. That evening, she showed the letter to Mrs. Peterson, then to Rebecca, and finally to Elias when he arrived for dinner. They sat in Rebecca's parlor, the letter between them like something toxic. "What are you going to do?" Elias asked quietly. "I'm going to write back and tell him no." Clara's voice was steady, despite the turmoil underneath. "I'll send what money I can spare, but I won't go back. I can't save him, Elias. I can only save myself." "That's not selfish," Rebecca said firmly. "That's survival." "It feels selfish. He's my father. He's alone and struggling. He's an adult who made his own choices," Elias interrupted gently. "You didn't make him drink. You didn't make him gamble. You didn't create his debts. And marrying Bernard Ashworth wouldn't solve anything. It would just transfer the dependency from your father to a husband you don't love." Clara knew he was right, but knowing didn't make it hurt less. "He'll never forgive me." "Maybe not. But Clara, you have to ask yourself, what's the cost of his forgiveness? Is it worth your whole life?" She thought about the schoolhouse, her students, the difference she was making. She thought about the community that had welcomed her, the women who'd become friends, the children who were learning to dream bigger than their circumstances. She thought about Elias, about the future they were building together. "No," she said finally, "it's not worth my whole life." The letter she wrote back was harder than anything she'd written before. She told her father she loved him, but couldn't return. She sent $20, half her personal funds for 2 months. She gave him the address of a charitable organization in Philadelphia that helped men struggling with drink. And she told him, as gently as she could, that he needed to save himself because she couldn't do it for him. It felt like cutting off a limb. It also felt like freedom. Elias stayed late that night, sitting with her by Rebecca's fire while she cried through the grief and guilt and relief. He didn't offer empty platitudes or try to fix her feelings. He just held her hand and let her process, solid and present and exactly what she needed. "My father would have liked you," Clara said eventually, wiping her eyes. "The man he used to be before my mother died. He was kind once, smart. He taught me to love books." "He gave you good things even if he couldn't sustain them," Elias said. "You can honor what was good while still protecting yourself from what's harmful." "When did you get so wise?" "Years of making mistakes and learning from them." He squeezed her hand. "Catherine dying taught me that we can't control everything. Sometimes terrible things happen, and there's nothing we could have done differently. The only choice is whether we let it destroy us or teach us." Clara looked at him, this man who'd lost so much and somehow remained open to love again. "What did it teach you?" "That life is fragile, that nothing's guaranteed, that if you find something good, you hold on to it with everything you have because tomorrow it might be gone." His eyes were intense on hers. "I found something good with you, Clara, and I'm not letting go unless you tell me to." "I'm not telling you to." She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. "I'm holding on too." March brought the first hints of spring and an unexpected visitor. Clara was dismissing the children for the day when a well-dressed woman appeared in the schoolhouse doorway. She was perhaps 40, expensively clothed in a way that marked her as an outsider, with sharp eyes that took in everything. "Miss Whitfield? I'm Mrs. Harriet Chambers from the Territorial Education Board. I'm here to evaluate your teaching." Clara's stomach dropped. She hadn't been informed of any evaluation, hadn't prepared anything special. The classroom was in its usual state, cluttered with student work, chalk dust everywhere, a half-written lesson still on the board. "Of course. Please, come in." Clara scrambled to present herself professionally. "I apologize for the mess. We've been working on a science project about local wildlife." Mrs. Chambers walked slowly around the room, examining everything. She picked up student papers, studied the lesson plan on Clara's desk, ran her finger along the bookshelf. Her face revealed nothing. "Tell me about your curriculum," she said finally. Clara took a breath and launched into an explanation of her teaching methods. She talked about differentiated instruction for the wide age range, about incorporating local history and science, about teaching writing through personal narrative. She showed Mrs. Chambers examples of student work. Daniel Cooper's advanced mathematics, Ruth Miller's improved reading, Joseph Miller's storytelling. Mrs. Chambers listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes in a small book. When Clara finished, the evaluator was silent for a long moment. "Miss Whitfield, your classroom management is unconventional. Your methods don't align with standard pedagogical practices. Your record-keeping is somewhat haphazard." She paused, and Clara's heart sank. "However, your students are clearly thriving. I've reviewed their progress since you arrived. Reading comprehension up across the board, mathematical skills improved, and most notably, attendance has increased 20%. Clara blinked in surprise. "Attendance? Children want to come to school when taught by you. Parents are keeping their children enrolled instead of pulling them for farm work. That's the best metric of effective teaching." Mrs. Chambers closed her notebook. "You're doing excellent work here, Miss Whitfield. Keep it up." Relief flooded through Clara so intensely she felt lightheaded. "Thank you. I wasn't expecting evaluation. We never announce them. More authentic that way." Mrs. Chambers moved toward the door, then paused. "I also heard about your rescue of the Miller family during the blizzard. That kind of dedication to students is rare. Wyoming is lucky to have you." After she left, Clara sank into her desk chair, emotions overwhelming her. She'd passed. Not just passed, excelled. Her teaching was officially recognized as good, validated by someone whose opinion mattered. The girl from Philadelphia who'd fled west with nothing but a certificate and hope had proven herself. She couldn't wait to tell Elias. That Sunday, he brought her to his ranch for the first time. Clara had imagined it dozens of times based on his descriptions, but reality was better. The house was solid and well-built, logs chinked carefully against the wind. Inside was sparse but comfortable, handmade furniture, a large fireplace, windows positioned to catch morning light. Everything spoke of a man who lived alone but hadn't given up on comfort entirely. "It's beautiful," Clara said, meaning it. "You built all this yourself?" "Most of it. My father started the house before he died. I finished it." Elias watched her explore, something vulnerable in his expression. "I always thought I'd fill it with a family someday. Then after Catherine, I stopped thinking about that. And now? Now I'm thinking about it again." He moved closer. "Clara, I need to tell you something. I've been waiting for the right time, but I don't think there is a right time. There's just now." Her heart started racing. "I'm listening." "I love you." He said it simply, without flourish. "I love your courage and your stubbornness and the way you fight for those kids. I love how you make me laugh and challenge me and see the world differently. I love who I am when I'm with you." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "Elias, I know it's only been 5 months. I know by Philadelphia standards that's too fast. But out here, we don't have the luxury of taking years to decide. Life's too uncertain, and I'm certain about you." He took both her hands in his. "I'm not asking yet. I'm just telling you how I feel, so you know. So you can think about what you want our future to look like." Clara looked at their joined hands, then up at his face, weathered and honest and full of hope. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from that way station where she'd expected to die to this ranch. where she was being offered a life beyond anything she'd imagined. "I love you too," she said, and watched wonder bloom across his face. "I've been trying not to say it, trying to be careful and sensible. But Elias, I fell in love with you somewhere between you saving my life and teaching me to bank a fire. You make me feel strong and vulnerable at the same time. You make me want forever. Then let me give you forever." He pulled something from his pocket, a simple gold band with a small stone. "This was my mother's ring. She told me before she died to give it to someone who'd honor both the teaching and the loving, someone who'd be a partner, not a decoration." Clara stared at the ring, her breath catching. "Marry me, Clara. Not because you need saving or because frontier life requires it. Marry me because we're better together than apart. Because I want to wake up every day knowing you're building the life you want, and I get to be part of it." His voice was steady, but his hands shook slightly. "Teach your students, change the world, be exactly who you are. Just let me stand beside you while you do it." The proposal was everything Clara hadn't known she needed. No demands for her to change, no expectations that marriage would diminish her teaching, just an offer of partnership with someone who saw her completely and loved what he saw. "Yes," the word came out choked with tears. "Yes, I'll marry you." The ring slid onto her finger perfectly, like it had been waiting for her all along. Elias pulled her close and kissed her, and Clara felt the last pieces of her old life fall away. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't afraid. She was choosing, actively, deliberately choosing this man, this place, this future. When they finally pulled apart, both laughing and crying, Elias rested his forehead against hers. "Rebecca's going to be insufferable. She'll claim credit for this." "She probably deserves it," Clara admitted. "She saw this before we did." "No, I saw it the night I found you at that way station. I just had to wait for you to see it too." The announcement of their engagement sent Promise Creek into delighted chaos. Mrs. Peterson cried and hugged Clara and immediately began planning details. Rebecca did indeed claim full credit for the match and started organizing a wedding before Clara had even set a date. The school children were thrilled, especially Ruth Miller, who declared she'd known it would happen because that's how love works. Judge Crawford personally congratulated Elias, telling him he was marrying above his station, but then again, most men do. Samuel Hayes offered to host the reception at his feed store, which Clara and Elias politely declined. Reverend Aldrich launched into a 15-minute sermon about the sanctity of marriage during the next Sunday service, clearly directed at the happy couple. Through it all, Clara kept teaching. That was non-negotiable, and Elias never suggested otherwise. They planned the wedding for June, after school let out for summer, giving them time to prepare without disrupting her students' education. April and May passed in a blur of lesson planning and wedding preparations. Clara's students continued to thrive. Even Joseph Miller admitted he didn't hate school anymore, which was practically a declaration of love. Daniel Cooper was reading Latin fluently and talking about maybe becoming a lawyer someday. The Hayes sisters were writing stories that showed real literary promise. Sarah Thompson had come out of her shell entirely, participating eagerly in class discussions. The changes weren't just academic. These children were thinking bigger, dreaming beyond the narrow confines they'd been born into. That was what Clara had hoped for, what she'd worked toward, and now it was bearing fruit. In mid-May, another letter arrived from Philadelphia. Clara opened it with trepidation, expecting more guilt or demands. Instead, she found something unexpected. Her father had stopped drinking. He'd joined the charitable organization she'd recommended and was working as a clerk to pay down his debts. He wasn't asking for money or for her to return. He was apologizing, genuinely, humbly apologizing for the burden he'd placed on her, for trying to sell her in marriage to save himself, for not being the father she'd deserved. "I'm proud of you," he wrote in shaky script. "Your mother would be proud too. You became the woman she hoped you'd be, strong and independent and making a difference in the world. I'm sorry I tried to stop that. I'm sorry for everything." Clara read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't perfect. Her father had a long road ahead, and she had no illusions that this was permanent. But it was a start. And more importantly, it released her from the last chains of guilt. She could move forward into her new life without the weight of unfinished business pulling her back. She showed Elias the letter that evening. He read it silently, then pulled her close. "Does this change anything for you?" "No, it just makes it easier." She leaned into his warmth. "I can forgive him now without having to sacrifice myself to prove it. That's a gift." "Then I'm glad he gave it to you." The last weeks before the wedding were a whirlwind. Clara finished the school year with a final program that showcased everything her students had learned. Parents came away amazed at the progress their children had made. The school board offered Clara a contract for the next year with a salary increase, which she accepted immediately. Rebecca and Mrs. Peterson and half the women in Promise Creek descended on Clara with dresses and flowers and detailed opinions about every aspect of the ceremony. Elias mostly stayed out of it, wisely recognizing when retreat was the better part of valor. But he made sure Clara's preferences were honored, stepping in when the planning threatened to overwhelm her. "It's your day," he told the assembled women firmly. "Clara's day. Not an opportunity for you all to live vicariously. She wants simple, so we're doing simple." And it was simple, in the end. The ceremony took place in the small church on a perfect June morning. Wildflowers decorated the pews picked by her students who'd insisted on contributing. Rebecca stood as Clara's bridesmaid and Tim as Elias's best man. The children filled the first 3 rows, squirming with excitement. Clara wore a cream-colored dress that Mrs. Peterson's daughter had worn and altered to fit. She carried a bouquet of prairie roses that Elias had picked that morning. And when she walked down the aisle and saw him waiting at the altar, tall and steady and looking at her like she was starlight, she felt her heart overflow. Reverend Aldrich kept the ceremony mercifully brief. The vows were traditional but felt revolutionary in how much they promised partnership rather than possession. And when Elias kissed her as the church erupted in applause, Clara tasted salt from happy tears and knew this was the beginning of everything she'd hoped for and more than she'd imagined. The reception was held in the churchyard, tables laden with food that the whole town had contributed. Clara was hugged by dozens of people, congratulated by students and parents and townspeople who'd become friends. Nancy Miller cried openly, telling Clara she was the best thing that ever happened to Promise Creek. Daniel Cooper shook Elias's hand solemnly and told him he better treat Miss Whitfield right or else. As the sun began to set, casting everything in gold, Clara and Elias finally managed to steal a moment alone. They stood at the edge of the gathering, watching their community celebrate, hands intertwined. "Happy?" Elias asked softly. "Ridiculously happy." Clara leaned into him. "I keep thinking about that night at the way station, how terrified I was, how certain I was that I'd made a terrible mistake coming west. And now? Now I know it was the best decision I ever made." She turned to face him fully. "You asked me once what I wanted 5 years from now. I think I finally know the answer." "Tell me." "I want to still be teaching, watching children discover what they're capable of. I want our ranch to feel like home, books on the shelves and student papers on the table, and evidence of living fully everywhere." She took a breath. "And I want children of our own eventually. Little people who know that women can teach and love and build lives on their own terms. Who grow up seeing partnership instead of possession." Elias's smile was radiant. "That's exactly what I want too. All of it." "Good. Because you're stuck with me now, Elias Merrick. For better or worse, in blizzards and heat waves, through stubborn students and ranch disasters." "Wouldn't have it any other way, Clara Merrick." He said her new name like a benediction. "Wouldn't have it any other way." They rejoined the celebration, dancing and laughing and soaking up the joy of community and chosen family. And when the party finally ended and they rode back to the ranch together, Clara's trunk secured in the same wagon that had rescued her months before, she marveled at how far she'd come. From Philadelphia to Promise Creek, from desperate flight to deliberate choice, from the girl who'd fallen asleep beside her luggage expecting to die to the woman who'd been lifted into a wagon by a quiet cowboy and carried toward an unexpected future. The ranch house glowed with lamplight as they approached, looking warm and welcoming in the gathering dusk. Elias helped Clara down from the wagon, and they stood for a moment looking at their home. Not his anymore, but theirs. "Welcome home, Mrs. Merrick," Elias said, offering his hand. Clara took it, lacing their fingers together. Home, she repeated softly, testing the word. It fit perfectly, not because it was a place, but because it was a person. Because home was wherever Elias stood beside her, wherever her students learned and grew, wherever she could build a life on her own terms while knowing she wasn't alone. They walked inside together, closing the door on the Wyoming night, and Clara finally understood what her mother had tried to tell her all those years ago. Love didn't have to make you smaller. With the right person, love made you infinite, expanding your capacity for joy and courage and becoming more than you could have been alone. She'd come west running from one man's expectations. She'd found another man entirely, one who expected nothing except that she be fully herself. And in that freedom, in that partnership, Clara Whitfield Merrick had found not just survival but flourishing. The frontier had tried to kill her. Instead, it had remade her into someone stronger, braver, more completely alive than the girl who'd left Philadelphia could have imagined. And tomorrow she'd wake up in this house she'd helped build into a home, and she'd walk to that schoolhouse where her students waited, and she'd continue the work of changing young lives one lesson at a time. But tonight she was simply a woman who'd been saved by a cowboy's kindness and had discovered that being saved didn't mean being diminished, that accepting help didn't negate independence, that love, real love, made room for everything you were and everything you wanted to become. Clara Merrick fell asleep that night in her husband's arms, in the home they'd built together, in the life she'd chosen with eyes wide open and heart fully engaged. And her last thought before sleep claimed her was simple and true and everything she needed. She was home. She was loved. She was exactly where she belonged. And the story that had begun with a girl sleeping beside her luggage at the edge of the world had become a story of transformation and courage and love that honored both the woman she'd been and the woman she'd become. It was, she thought, a pretty good story after all. And the best part was that it was only the beginning. The two HTTPS youtube.com/watch VEEP5QVUYIOOS. Here's a 5-part cinematic summary in American storytelling style, retitled with fresh character names to avoid duplication in your CB project. Tone: dramatic, romantic frontier narrative. Complete arc with closure. What? Title: She slept beside her luggage until the cowboy lifted her into his wagon. 1. Opening. The girl at the edge of the world. Under a merciless Wyoming sun, Clara Whitfield, a 19-year-old teacher from Philadelphia, sat beside her 2 leather trunks at a desolate way station 5 miles from Promise Creek. She'd spent her last $3 chasing a dream of teaching on the frontier, but the stagecoach driver abandoned her after a quarrel. As twilight fell and coyotes howled, she huddled by her bags, trembling at her own foolishness. Exhaustion finally claimed her, just as wagon wheels creaked through the night and a shadow fell across her sleeping form. 2. Rising action. The stranger and the town. Elias Merrick, a rugged horse rancher, spotted the sleeping girl and couldn't leave her to the wolves, or worse. Lifting her gently into his wagon, he drove her through the moonlight to Promise Creek. She awoke in fright, demanding answers, only to realize he'd saved her. Their wary conversation softened into mutual respect. In town, the boarding house keeper fussed over Clara while Elias disappeared into the night. By dawn, she began her new post at the one-room schoolhouse, poorly furnished but full of promise. Yet as she unpacked her books and dreams, her mind returned to the man who'd wordlessly carried her out of danger. 3. Climax. Lessons, losses, and the blizzard ride. Weeks later, as the schoolhouse came alive with laughter, Elias repaired her stove and taught her to ride a gentle chestnut mare named Maple. Their connection deepened over shared memories of loss, his father at Shiloh, her mother to illness, until affection grew in the quiet spaces between lessons. Then winter struck. When a blizzard trapped Clara at her isolated cabin, Elias rode through the storm to rescue her. Wrapped in his coat, clinging to his warmth as his horse pushed through white oblivion, she realized how much trust and love had already taken root between them. That night, safe by Mrs. Peterson's fire, he spoke her name softly for the first time, and something in her heart shifted forever. 4. Resolution, the courtship, and the choice. Snow melted into spring, and what began as gratitude became an open courtship. Elias admired Clara's fierce independence. She admired his integrity and calm strength. Their dinners in town were talk of Promise Creek. Over pie and coffee, she confessed the truth about leaving Philadelphia, her father's debts, the suitor she refused, the need to live with purpose. Elias listened without judgment, only admiration. By February, he invited her to his ranch, a solid home built with his own hands, already prepared for a family. Before the fire, he took her hand and, with quiet conviction, asked her to marry him. Her yes was tearful, certain, and complete. 5. Breakthrough and ending, from rescue to home. June brought wildflowers and wedding bells. The townsfolk filled the small church, her students carrying a quilt stitched with lessons they'd learned under Miss Whitfield. When Elias kissed her as Mrs. Merrick, it was gentle, reverent, and full of promise. As they rode back to the ranch, the same road where he'd once found her asleep beside her luggage, Clara gazed at the open plains and thought of how far she'd come. She wasn't a lost girl anymore. She was a teacher, a wife, and a woman who had crossed a continent to find not just survival, but belonging. When Elias handed her the reins and said, "Welcome home," she smiled through tears and whispered, "Home," knowing this love, born in dust and moonlight, would carry them through every season ahead.